Hello, everyone. Nice to see you on my channel, Touching Stories. Today you will hear an amazing story that is based on real events. It's a drama that will be a very important lesson for everyone.
Olivia knew she was gonna die here. When? It was only a matter of time, but judging by the coughing that shook her frail, weakened body and the tingling in her sternum at her heart, her time would come soon. With unruly fingers, the old woman grasped the edge of the shabby blanket and pulled it higher. It was a futile effort. She couldn't get warm anyway. There were too many gaps in the walls. The January blizzard raged outside the barracks. Olivia opened her eyes, and the darkness beneath her eyelids was replaced by an almost equally all-encompassing darkness indoors. Something rustled in the distance and close at the same time. Before, when this barracks had been a residential and even a welcome home for working people on one of the city's outlying streets, mice would have rustled like that, as if someone were breaking down a damaged harpsichord. But there were no mice here now, because there was simply nothing for them to eat. And it was the old house itself that made the noise, the wooden rafters, walls, and ceilings that seemed to be suffering from the cold winter, from the fact that no one was taking care of them, that no one needed them anymore. The old bed was hard, and the pain in her back seemed to keep her awake, even if merciful sleep came to Olivia. But there was no strength to turn over. The old woman could no longer remember how long she'd been here. 3 days? A week? When it was still day, she got up, drank a little water, and ate the rest of the cookies. One was in a red paper wrapper labeled strawberry. Then she lay down. I thought she would lie down for a while and go to her, so to speak, work. But I overslept, old girl. Olivia gently sucked in air as she didn't swallow it greedily. She could delay a new coughing fit. But much more than the cold and hunger, she was tormented by her memories. Why doesn't a human being, such a strong creature, the pinnacle of evolution, have the ability to turn off memory at will, to razz, and like a switch turned, and no more tormenting, no more twisting of the soul what was gone forever, no more questions about whether you could have changed anything, prevented it? Memories came, bright, tenacious, juicy, merciless. Mom, am I really going to be happy? That day, her only child, her daughter Maria, was getting married. Olivia looked at the statuesque beauty and could not believe that this day had come, that her Maria today will become a wife. She will begin her own special, quiet adult life. Really, Olivia smiled hastily, furtively brushed away her tears and began to correct the veil that covered the bride's head and shoulders with a puffy cloud. Maria was a late child. Olivia had become a mother at 41. The doctors had been ruthless. They had assured her that such an old pregnancy would be problematic, but the woman had felt as good as ever for 9 months. It seemed to her that thanks to this baby, she had the strength to live on, to meet each day with hope for the best. And after all, it was not easy. With her husband, Hillary, they lived soul to soul for more than 20 years. They were like barely fledged chicks, hurriedly left their parents' nests and rushed into the big life, as if someone promised them that everything would be great. Even their friends didn't believe that it would last, saying that it was just not love forever, but the craziness of young student life, which, however, already crossed all boundaries, because Maria and Hillary behaved like crazy a little bit, to couples on a hand-in-hand, literally walked in everywhere together. Soon they were nicknamed inseparable parrots. But the lovers did not take offense, and in general, they were not interested in anyone and anything but each other. Then they finished studying. He decided to become a designer and create cars. She decided to be a teacher of French. They, by the way, were unlike each other in many ways. Maria loved fruits and greens, dancing was a lark, and also an exceptionally non-conflicted person. And even if you had to ask in the store to add or subtract, say, cheese, it was given to her with difficulty, and more often she obediently bought what they gave. Hillary was an owl, recognized only meat, bread, and francons as food, hated to dance, because he considered himself awkward and was not averse to even fight for a strange company, if it seemed that they were fighting for a fair and just cause. They were opposites, and at the same time they complemented each other perfectly. The newly formed cell of society first lived in a dormitory, then in a service apartment, which was given to Hillary. Years passed. They were still as happy together, except that there were no children. Doctors were throwing up their hands and saying that, theoretically, both spouses do not have pathologies, but just, that's how cruel nature has disposed. There is such incompatibility in exceptional cases. If they had divorced, each of the couple would have been able to create a family where children would have been born, but they decided to stay together. And as if the universe had mercy on those whose love withstood such a test. When they had long ago stopped hoping, Olivia realized that she was pregnant. She did not know how to tell her husband about it and decided to postpone this news until the vacation. The couple were going to spend it in a southern vacation home, which was famous for its mineral waters. But life was overturned by misfortune. Hillary died. Suddenly and ridiculously. Just from the roof fell a piece of stucco. When Olivia was informed about it, she only cried out and collapsed without feelings. She woke up in the hospital, bedridden. The doctor explained that she'd been like that for several days, and it was an involuntary measure because she'd fall into a strange, deep sleep, and then she'd wake up, but she'd start screaming and want to run. The doctor took Olivia's hand and looked into her eyes. "You have to do this, for the baby's sake. It depends on you." And then after a moment's hesitation, he added, "Your husband would want you both to be healthy and happy." Olivia left the hospital and went back to her apartment. She began to pack. "I should have gone south. She doesn't have a heart," hissed an old neighbor sitting on a bench in the company of similarly elderly friends when Olivia left the house with a suitcase in her hand and got into a cab. She had barely had time to bury her husband, and already she was on vacation. Oh, and did you see that? The flowered dress. But Olivia, even if she had heard it, wouldn't have cared. She just thought it was the right thing to do and that Hillary would approve of her vacation, and the fact that an unborn child could benefit from fresh sea air, sunshine, and fresh fruit. Relatives. Hillary's own parents and family, the young woman, by the way, did not disapprove. Maybe they thought something like that, but they kept silent, and they supported her before the birth and then when her daughter was born. It was decided to name her after a very distant relative who lived even in the days of serfdom. That Maria was an actress in the theater of a certain baron, who for love of her even divorced his. He'd said he owned his own business. No, not even that. He bragged about it, saying he doesn't work for his uncle, but makes a lot of money himself. Olivia, of course, was interested in the details. It was not enough for her to be shown on the phone blurry photos of supposedly owned cars in a house, which were supposedly in a neighboring region, because Steve had supposedly lived there some time ago. And then he introduced his bride and future mother-in-law to his family, and a lot of curious details came to light. Apparently, not everyone in this family was ready to support the legend of Steve, and Olivia learned that no house and car he has the photo he downloaded from the internet. It also turned out that his business is the sale of biologically active supplements, which are very effective against many diseases. Many people were involved in this strange business, but in fact, as Olivia realized, the real profit was only those who stood at the top. Her mother had tried to warn her daughter about all of this. She said that it was all very strange, suspicious. Olivia said that she couldn't believe that this company Steve was working for even existed. There was a huge scandal, but Maria took her fiance's side. She forgave him the deception with the housing and the car, as well as the fact that he gave her earrings with fake diamonds. "I just wanted to impress you," Steve justified himself pathetically and even let out a tear. "A girl like you deserves the best. You could have chosen a millionaire sheik, but you chose me and I wanted to please you. But give me a chance and I'll really earn it all." Maria had had enough of this. She sternly and coldly told her mother not to even try to interfere with her happiness, otherwise she might not come to the wedding. Olivia was faced with a cruel choice and decided that she would keep a good relationship with her daughter in there. Maybe she is just a selfish woman who is afraid of losing the child and should also believe that Steve will improve in time. But Olivia also timidly hoped that just in time, Maria would see what a bad man he was and file for divorce. And she, as a good mother, would be there for it. But Olivia hardly noticed these oddities. All her thoughts, all her being, were absorbed in the new knowledge. The old woman wept when Mary, who was also overwhelmed with emotion, told her husband that she was expecting a child. He embraced his wife, patted her eyes, and then went to sleep. And went day after day. Time flew. Unlike her own, her daughter's pregnancy was hard, But doctors only waved their hands and said that apparently something in the body is wrong, but they cannot understand what it is. At the due date, the baby was born. It was a sturdy boy, and they decided to name him Tony, in honor of his great-great-grandfather. Olivia barely remembered the man. She'd seen him only a few times in the village in her early childhood, and his gray hair and beard didn't match his ceiling-high stature and mighty broad shoulders. Tony lived as a hermit in a forest hut. In the winter he hunted, and in the summer he went out to the people for a short time. That is, he visited his relatives, looked after their farming in the collective farms, and helped them with advice and deeds, because Tony's health for the rest of his life was as good as his appearance. A great giant, Olivia believed with all her heart that now everything would get better, but it didn't. Steve still somehow held on during his wife's pregnancy, but then as if off the brakes. At home, he began to make scandals, yes, the kind that rarely any quarrelsome woman is capable of. He could disappear for a week and then come back, dirty, in torn clothes, smelly, drunk. Olivia finally talked to her daughter about the fact that it was all wrong, but Maria only cried and repeated that Steve has a difficult period in life and probably depression on the background of the first in his life paternal experience. And that's why he wants it to be bad not only for him, but for everyone around him. The old lady was honest in her opinion, but there was nothing else she could do, because there was still the last drop of hope that one day and very soon the grief-stricken father would come to his senses. Olivia also thought that if he destroyed her daughter's marriage, it would be difficult for her, a divorced woman with a child in her arms, to find her happiness as a woman again. And Olivia also noticed that Maria had somehow changed since she had told her about her pregnancy. It was as if she had lost her inner light, the very light that could give a person the will to live, help him to be happy. And Olivia was afraid that this light would never come back, and she didn't understand why it had disappeared. Steve's family, meanwhile, had no interest in his child. They congratulated him on the phone, and that was it. In fact, as Olivia realized, Steve and his family had had a final falling out, and they disowned him. And she was ashamed to be so angry in her thoughts, but she could understand. And then, when Maria passed the annual medical examination as she was used to, she was diagnosed with a terrible diagnosis, oncology, and in the final stage. Olivia was knocked off her feet, looking for money for treatment. She even stopped paying attention to Steve. He didn't matter at all now. And then it was over very quickly. Maria was gone, did not help expensive drugs, for the sake of which Olivia emptied the bank account, where she had been saving all her life for a rainy day. Powerless was a psychic, which she turned to at the very end. Olivia begged her daughter to gather strength, to defeat the disease for the sake of not leaving her son an orphan. But all was useless. Maria was buried exactly 3 days before little Tony was to be 1 year and 2 months. The loss of her daughter, who had not lived to the age of 27, was for Olivia that fatal blow, which seemed to be layered on top of the loss of her husband. Life force left her. She was weakening, almost literally melting with each passing day. 3 months after the funeral of her daughter, Olivia was in the hospital. The doctor suspected a stroke. Then she was discharged, but the consequences remained. Sharply worsened mobility, back pain, spiking blood pressure. It was there, in the hospital, Olivia once came to Olivia's son-in-law. He brought some papers and said that they need to be signed urgently. Allegedly, it was somehow related to the inheritance, getting that share in the apartment, which belonged to Maria, because she, Olivia, in the early noughties rewrote half of it to her daughter, gave it as a gift. Olivia was crushed by grief. She was very lonely and scared. She signed everything. "What's this?" the old woman asked confusedly when she came back from the hospital and saw a bag in the hallway, in which her things were carelessly stacked. Her things. "I'm going to live in the apartment now, and I don't need an old woman in the subdivision," Steve said. Olivia felt like the room had run out of air. Her head buzzed and rumbled, and she swayed. "Where are you hatching, old girl? You signed it all yourself." The son-in-law smirked. "So, it was about the inheritance. You said it was for the notary," said the old woman. "Well, it turns out so." The son-in-law got serious. "It's like a gift to me for the apartment was. And the other half of it, it means that I, as a husband from the deceased, will pass. I'm gonna sell it. What? Olivia was in a bad way, leaning against the jamb, blinking and squinting, but her eyes were still blurry. We couldn't get along. Steve spread his hands and pretended to be sorry, but it came out as a horrible grin. That means you'll go to a new apartment, Grandma? Your things are here, as you can see. I'm not a thief. I don't want anyone else's stuff. Come on, let's go. Where to? I don't want to. Who's asking you? Are you deaf? This apartment is mine now. By law. It's fair. I gave it to you. But I'm not. Yeah, you're so smart. So, listen, old woman. He grabbed her by the shoulders so that her joints ached and shook Olivia. Nobody's gonna listen to you. Is that your signature? It's yours. It's legal. And if you say anything, I'll have you committed to the loony bin, you understand. The truth that she was no longer the mistress of her own house fell on Olivia hard, as if the cold, wet earth had crushed her, and she couldn't move her arms or shout for help. The only strength she had was to hold on to this reality somehow, and the fact that there was a baby sleeping in the far room gave her strength. Olivia was struck by lightning. Her eyes cleared, and she pressed her hands against Steve's chest, trying to move him aside. And my grandson, how could he be without me? Steve, don't push me. I'll babysit him. How can he be alone? How can he be alone without me, huh? He'll be all right, said his son-in-law, his expression as if he'd forgotten his own son's existence for a while. No, I don't need you here. Don't cry, grandmother. I'll find some girl. He wrinkled his face again in the semblance of a smile. To watch him. I'm a handsome groom now. There, what a house. And if, he shook the old woman again, if you go around here, whining to the neighbors, I'll get rid of the boy in no time. Oh, Steve, he's your son. Who knows, the man said. Do you think your Maria was quiet? Ha, she did things like that. No. You have a heart. Maybe I'll throw it in the garbage, shrugged his son-in-law. But if you, Grandma, shut up and get out of the way, then maybe I won't touch him. Well, are you going to the new apartment? There was silence between them for a few minutes. Olivia lowered her head obediently. I'll go, but can I? Let me see my grandson, just once. No. He opened the door and forced her onto the landing. You'll start a howl, I know you. Soon Olivia was in the car at the driveway, her things stuffed in the trunk. Good afternoon. Steve was greeted by a neighbor who came up the driveway at the same time. Where are you going? I'm taking my grandmother to a sanatorium, answered Steve. She needs a change of scenery after the funeral. That's right, shook his head neighbor. That change of scenery is useful after life's upheavals. Have a good rest, Olivia. Keep strong. And he waved his hand, sincerely wishing her all the best. The car drove for a long time through the city. It seemed like an eternity to Olivia. Finally, it stopped. High-rises and even 5-story buildings were far behind a pile of some industrial enterprises, frowning giants hidden behind fences and gates. Olivia got out of the car and twisted her head in confusion. Where had he taken her? There were, without exaggeration, barracks all around, and such barracks that they should have been torn down a long time ago. In some places, there was light in the windows, but most of them were boarded up, covered with plywood or even just plastic bags. I got a house here, Steve explained, getting out of the car. Let's go, Grandma, for the housewarming party. Olivia gulped for air like a beach fish and felt just as helpless. Creak, creak, creak. They entered the damp-smelling entryway, and the son-in-law jingled his keys, unlocking the shaggy sodden door. A lone light bulb flickered on under the ceiling, illuminating the squalid dwelling, a tiny corridor, and a darkened room that could be seen through the open door ahead. Olivia listened to Steve as if through a drowsy dream when she was still floating in it, but already aware of what was going on in the world around her. He said that here was a room, a living room, a cubbyhole with a kitchen, a bathroom. You owe for the light, by the way, he said. You got to pay, old girl, or they'll cut off the electricity. The refrigerator doesn't work, by the way. The water leaks? Well, you old people don't need much, do you? You'll organize everything here somehow. You've seen the world revolution. He chuckled at his joke. So you must be used to this kind of life. Enough, you've had enough. Now, as they say, let the young go. Olivia realized only now that her son-in-law had taken something to amuse himself, and he was swaying. She realized that her son-in-law had obviously taken something to cheer him up. He was even swaying. Steve stepped out for a moment and returned, dragging all of Olivia's luggage. He dropped it all on the floor. Something jingled in the depths of the stuffed bag. She realized her son-in-law hadn't packed her things with love. He just raked up what was in her closet, but of course, he kept what he could still sell for a profit. Kind of like he was taking care of his own personal gain. Olivia sighed and rubbed her wet eyes with her fingers, wiping them. She just couldn't understand. Why didn't he just throw her out on the street? Why does he pretend to care? That's not caring, no. Throwing out here. Does he have a shred of conscience and he muffles it like this? Or does he want to cover himself in front of people that he's not quite a murderer? He's not throwing his mother-in-law into the garbage. He's just taking her to another place of residence. That's it, old girl, live. Steve was already standing in the corridor, by the door. And watch me, he lowered his voice. If you're a fool, if you run to me or complain to anyone, I'll teach you a lesson. I'll teach you a lesson you'll regret. Do you understand? Yeah. Olivia's heart raced, cold sweat broke out. She had never been a thief before. She threw the sausage on the cash register and hurried away. There are so many beggars, she said angrily. Olivia shoved her hands in her pockets to keep warm. I'd lost my mittens somewhere. I couldn't find them. And then she pulled her right hand out of her pocket. There was a 50-ruble bill in it. There was still a little bit left after the payment for electricity. I just put the money in the wrong pocket, where I usually used to carry it. Here, I showed the same cashier the money. I'll pay. The painted girl hummed, pressed her lips together, but said nothing and punched in her purchases. A loaf of bread and processed cheese. Back in the barracks, Olivia took a drink of tap water and drank her lunch. She could hardly resist eating it all, so she let some cheese for dinner and a thick slice of bread for breakfast. And then the next day, Olivia called her son-in-law. The card. She knew he was smirking on the other end. No, I didn't lose it. But you're old. You could lose it. I have it. It's in my custody. Think about it. What do you need that much for? You have a grandson. No? Don't be afraid. When the pension comes, I'll take it off. Think of it as alimony from you for your grandson. But Olivia didn't know how to react to what was happening. Olivia sighed. So now, at least she would have hot tea. The next day, she went to the store again. Again, she stood up and held out her hand. It was shameful to admit it, but now the act of begging was easier. A couple of times, Olivia went inside and pretended to choose items from the shelves to warm herself up a little before returning to her work, as she mentally called it. By evening, it was clear that she had enough for such luxuries as a packet of tea and a bag of franca. But no matter how brave the old woman was, and very soon the meager ration made itself felt. The body settled in lightness, some airiness, but in the morning to get out of bed was getting harder and harder. And then there was a disaster. The house turned off the heating. How can we live now? Grandma Maria turned to the workers who were digging up the frozen ground not far from the barracks. Warm yourselves with clothes, turn on the heaters, answered the boy and stomped his feet. He was already freezing, and the work, which promised to drag on due to the old age of local constructions, was just beginning. I honestly don't know when we'll finish. Maybe tomorrow, or maybe a week from now. Olivia sighed and went back to her usual place, the store. But no sooner had she gotten up than that sales girl looked out. This isn't a bum shop. Get out. Get out. She raised her voice to a shout. I'm going to call the cops on you. What am I doing? Olivia shook her head, her shoulders shaking. Go away. The guard stood behind the girl's shoulders. Or I'll put you in a snowdrift with your head down, and you'll sit there until spring. This guy looked just like his brother-in-law, and he even had the same ugly grin. Olivia walked and shuffled away. The snowfall was getting heavier. It seemed like a white shroud of snow, howling and whirling. Grandmother didn't understand where she had turned. It seemed that her house was over there. Home. Is this the place? This must be the last shelter. Olivia stopped and turned her nose. The overwhelming smell of muffins and coffee hit her. She walked toward the bakery, which stood alone where the courtyards of the 5-story buildings began. Lamps in old-fashioned green lampshades burned welcomingly outside the windows. There were even a few tables inside, and some of them were occupied by people. They were eating and drinking, warm and smiling. They were well nourished, cozy, safe. The old woman swallowed her saliva. I wish I could eat a cake and drink sweet tea too. Only, today she couldn't ask for a penny of alms. And from yesterday, literally 1 ruble was in her pocket. For that, Olivia thought they wouldn't even let her have a crumb. Gathering the rest of her strength, both physical and mental, Olivia was about to go further, somewhere, but suddenly her foot slipped. Losing her balance, the old woman fell. But she was lucky. There was a snowball at the bottom, and as Olivia determined by her first sensations, she didn't break anything. But she had no strength to get up. The feet of passers-by passed by, indifferent to other people's grief. "Help!" Olivia whispered weakly, and suddenly she was pulled up, gently lifted. The old woman gasped, blinked. The setting sun was shining from the back of the man who had come to help her, and it was hard to make out his face. "Are you all right? Does anything hurt?" the stranger asked. He was much taller than Grandma. She blinked some more. There was a cloud in the sun, curly and gray-white, the kind of cloud that promised there would be more snowfall and cold. Oh, how much more! And as the light shone less brightly, Olivia could see her savior. He was a young man, his eyes black, his hair as long as a raven's wing. He was wearing black jeans, a black sheepskin coat, in fact, black everything. Olivia noticed it, but she didn't have an opinion about it. She didn't care, and what did it matter if the man was nice and helpful? Confused, she answered that she was in one piece. "Did you come this way?" He pointed to the bakery. "The steps are slippery. Let me help you up." "No," Olivia shook her head. Then her lips trembled, and she mumbled through her tears that no, she shouldn't go there, she couldn't buy anything. Grandmother Maria was not accustomed to complain about her life, but now it was as if she had burst into tears. She was talking about the fact that she had been chased away from the place where she had asked. And was that a crime? "I'm sorry," she sobbed, finally gathering her strength. "Thank you for lifting me up." And she was about to leave. "Grandmother, let's go," suddenly said the stranger and resolutely dragged her into the bakery. "What? Why?" But, he said he just wanted to give her a treat. Why? Well, he just wanted to do it. As a gift. Just like that. Olivia was timid. But then, as they stood at the display case, she asked for a cake and cookies and tea. The stranger got himself a coffee and they just sat at a table. He didn't bother with conversation. He was looking out the window. Olivia, chewing diligently and sipping greedily from her cup, looked at him. Who was he? Dressed decently and even, if she understood anything else in this world, expensively. His hands aren't workman's. They seem soft and his nails are neat. On one of his fingers is a large silver ring with a red stone. Finally, Olivia got up from the table. So did he. She wanted to thank him again, but before she could say a word, he returned to the counter. 2 large meat pies, 5 lingonberry buns, 3 loaves of bread, 5 cottons, a packet of coffee. Olivia looked at him, then at the bag of food in her hands. "No offense, Grandma, but I just think you'll need it." He smiled and took her hand and led her out of the bakery. The saleswoman behind the counter rounded her eyes. Such a spectacular man and such a thing. Not only did he bring some vagrant from the street, although maybe she was a relative, he bought her all sorts of things. It would have been better. The girl shook her head. It would have been better if he had asked her for her phone number. "Thank you. Oh, my dear, thank you. I don't know how to thank." Olivia was overwhelmed with feelings. A complete stranger, and such a thing. He bought her so much. She clung tightly to his hand as if without it she would have fallen again. "You're welcome, Grandmother." He smiled at her. "You have to do a good deed once in a while, don't you?" That's right. He nodded. "Well, good luck to you, Grandma. May everything go well for you." Delicately removing her hand from his arm, he walked away. He was glad that he had met this old woman and done a good deed. It was his long tradition to do some good deed before. He was a bit superstitious and believed that a good deed in the universe balanced what he had to do now. And there was much to be done, and perhaps, if circumstances demanded it, His task would bring much pain and suffering to one man, but heaven knows the wretch deserves it. 2 weeks have passed since the stranger in black helped her. His generous gift of baked goods had helped the old woman feel full for 3 days, but then it had gotten worse again. On top of that, Olivia had a cold. Sometimes she tried to call her son-in-law, who answered the phone once. He listened to the old woman's pleas, said that he would come by the other day, and he didn't. Olivia was getting worse. She thought maybe she should at least go to her ex-neighbors, maybe call them and ask for help. But then she remembered Steve's terrible threats, and the old woman realized that she wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for her grandson. If only nothing bad had happened to him. And suddenly her son-in-law called. In a cheerful voice, said that the house now has a mistress and the boy, stepmother. He handed the phone to someone and Olivia recognized who it was by his voice. Then to be sure she clarified and even calmed down a little. It turned out to be the neighbor from the first floor, Veronica. Veronica was a divorced woman in her 30s who claimed that someone had put a celibacy ring on her. Veronica lived with her more fortunate married sister and had in the house of a close relative of the role of a kind of babysitter for her 5 children. So theoretically, Veronica had experience in dealing with babies. "How are you, Olivia?" Veronica asked. "Steve said you're at the sanitarium. How are you? Do you miss home?" Olivia could barely speak. She looked around the room. The workers had fixed the heating main, but then it broke again. And for the 4th day, the barracks was cold, and it looked as if the frost would soon cover everything inside with frost. Grandma Maria was not used to lying, but she couldn't tell the truth either, because she was a little afraid for herself. "Yes, I miss you, but I don't know when I'll be back." "Ah." Veronica stretched, and it seemed that she was even glad. "Steve said that you wanted to visit your relatives. Well, don't worry about a thing. Tony is a very good boy, just a perfect child." And the neighbor told how he eats, plays, babbles. Tears rolled from the old woman's eyes. When the conversation ended, she suddenly felt so good. She went to the kitchen and heated boiling water, drank it with cookies from the package of strawberry. She climbed under a pile of blankets. She had found all sorts of old ones in the storeroom of the same apartment and tried to sleep. It was impossible to get warm, but at least in a dream the cold didn't bother her so much. And if she was lucky, Olivia hoped that maybe she'd dream about her daughter. And if she was lucky, Hillary. "Oh, you?" And the father. Veronica was not a woman shy and large, so with men with whom she came together from time to time, in the hope of arranging her female happiness, she used to talk frankly and sometimes even spiced her speech with a strong word. "Why are you hatching?" "No, for the fact that the old lady sent to the sanatorium, thank you, as they call it. I know you men. If something goes wrong, it's your mother-in-law's fault, but you take care of her. But what did you turn the apartment into without her, huh? And if I wasn't here, it would be a pigsty, wouldn't it?" Steve didn't answer. He pretended to be absorbed in the soccer match on the screen. "Oh, you've taken my soul out," Veronica said. And then she was distracted by a phone call. It was her sister. It turned out that she had a night shift. Her husband was down with the flu, and the eldest daughter decided to spend the night at a friend's house. So it turned out that the remaining 4 children aged from 3 to 12 years old have no one to look after them. Theoretically, my sister could not go to the warehouse marketplace on the night shift, but they're paid at an increased rate. On the nose was the next payment on the loan. "I realized that you'd be lost without me." Veronica snorted and promised to be there in 5 minutes. The woman looked at Steve, who was watching the match like a meditator. She shook her head and decided to look in on little Tony. The little boy was awake, tossing and turning. Veronica touched his forehead. "Well, that's right, fever." It wasn't her baby, and Steve didn't even call her to marry him. So they met, and she started to live with him, but she hadn't moved out of her sister's house yet. But Veronica's heart squeezed as she imagined that the little boy would be left alone with his father, who, frankly speaking, had already forgotten even to feed him. Veronica began to come here the very next day after Grandma Maria had left for the sanatorium. She sincerely sympathized with the old woman's grief and did not want to get in her face. And in general, Veronica thought badly of herself for the fact that barely a man buried his wife. She came to him. But on the other hand, that's life. Veronica explained her position to her sister. I've known Steve for a long time, since he's been married to Maria. May she rest in peace. Married. So I'm not a slutty, immoral woman, but just in a hurry. I'm not judging you, replied the sister. It's just that people will talk. Let them talk. Veronica dismissed it. What's in it for me? Cold. Hot? I am, already 38 years old. A big girl, I'm sorry. I'll live alone a little longer, and I'll turn into a grandma, so. And by the way, I'm very noble. She splashed her hands. I'll live with a man who's a single father. A stranger's child, not everyone will accept. But I will. No offense. Oh, Veronica, said her sister. Do as you please, but Steve's a bit shady. So what? Maria married him, all right. All right, enough about dead people at night. And Veronica spit over her left shoulder just in case. Steve, do you mind if I take Tony with me? Well, in my sister's apartment until morning, until dinner? Veronica turned to the man and explained to him the work-family circumstances of the relative. It doesn't make any difference, replied Steve. At least she won't yell. I'm sick of it. And we just have a headache, or maybe a sore throat, or maybe a tummy. Yes, we? Well, nothing. Now you and I will get together. We'll go to visit, right? Soon Steve was alone. He heard the door slam, but he didn't go to close it. He was just lazy and decided that he would go later, but for now he should watch soccer. The phone beeped with an incoming message. Steve threw a lazy glance at it. What else is there? It had been sent by a man Steve had worked with not so long ago, selling miracle cures. And this man wrote what Steve already knew, that their office was exposed by some journalists, that they were threatened with litigation by deceived people who believed that the drug would cure anything, even cancer, or even grow a new hand for a disabled person. Steve had left before all this started. He had been squeezed out by other people who had come into this perishable business. He lazily flipped through a few messages, not understanding why he was being told all this again. But the last lines alerted him. Apparently, someone has been hit hard. The man wrote, I'm only warning you because I borrowed money from you and I couldn't pay you back. And I won't be able to, by the way. I'm sorry. Steve frowned. What could he be warned about? The fact that he would be charged something for selling useless pacifiers for tens of thousands of dollars. He did not care. Everything was clean. And the suckers, mostly old people, they themselves, in Steve's opinion, were guilty of falling for the advertising and did not read the instructions. But then Steve opened the next message and rounded his eyes. You sold this to Grandpa Frank, remember? They are looking for whoever did it. I'd advise you to get away, preferably overseas, and get plastic surgery to make sure they don't find you. That's it. Goodbye. And thanks for the money. You're not far from those suckers yourself. Steve cursed. And indeed, he was an idiot when he gave his last paycheck from the case under the promise of repayment of the debt with a crazy interest, which this man swore to repay, because, allegedly, he knew how to play with stocks. I fell for it myself. In fact, he was as stupid as the pensioners who hoped to cure all their ailments with miracle vitamins. But who was Grandpa Frank? Steve could not remember such a person. In general, he had no need to remember all the old people with whom he worked, but he felt uneasy. Steve shivered and suddenly thought about the other day when he saw a strange black car in front of his driveway. Then, remembering that he hadn't closed the door behind Veronica, he jumped up from the sofa and went into the corridor. The stadium roared as another goal was scored. Steve thought that the sound could be turned down, and he froze in the corridor, because now there was a stranger standing there, and the idea that it was a drunken neighbor mistook the door dropped at once. This man was young, tall, and nightmarishly strong in appearance. Clad in black, he literally radiated menace. Steve? He asked, but it seemed that the question was rhetorically mocking, because he knows exactly whose apartment he got into and who was in front of him. Buy alarm system Baloo and sleep easy. With Baloo, your home is protected from any threat. Shouted an advertisement on TV, and Steve thought that the protection of this particular apartment was at full zero. He left the door open himself. Made it easier for this guy, whoever he was, to accomplish his obviously sinister task. If you're not a complete idiot, you'll sit down, keep your hands where I can see them, and we'll talk, he said, and moved forward, moved silently, like a cat. Steve swallowed hard. Shall we go into the kitchen? said Steve. The stranger nodded. Steve took a step forward, another. This hallway was full of junk that Olivia wouldn't throw away. And among the things that stood out was a floor rack, like the kind that would be more appropriate in a clothing store or a theater dressing room. On it hung Maria's outer garments, which had not been cleaned up in time, as well as her grandmother's scribbled fur coat, which Steve had decided not to give to her, but to sell later. And when Steve found himself near this rack, he suddenly grabbed the bar with both hands, jerked it to the side, and pushed it so that the structure with the things collapsed on the stranger. He did not expect such a maneuver and trivially fell to the floor, buried by the closet. But Steve realized that it would not last long, so he jumped out of the apartment and, jumping over 2 steps, rushed downstairs. Taif! Yawp! He was blocked by Albert, an old librarian who lived with an old lady wife who was head of the house committee, and 4 dachshunds with a temper and an angry temper that would be good for 40 bull terriers. Steve hesitated as he tried to squeeze past Albert's pack without them biting his limbs. Finally, he jumped out of the driveway. Oh, it's freezing. They promised a frost of 30, but it felt like -100 on bare feet, in just sweatpants and a t-shirt. Steve was glad that he had accidentally left the bunch of keys, including the car keys, in his pocket. He left them because they had a keychain in the form of a funny green frog, which he always clutched in his hand while watching soccer and believed that it would support his favorite team with luck. Somehow he remembered that Maria jokingly called him crazy for this. Steve rushed to this car and, gritting his teeth, shaking his whole body, tried to start the engine. Where to now? He decided that he would have to try to call that guy and find out from him what was going on. But right now, he had to get somewhere safe. And Steve knew where that place was. Olivia woke up abruptly, not even realizing what had caused it. She was dreaming about something. I think it was her daughter. That's right. She dreamed of that distant day more than a year ago when, as it seemed, she had finally divorced her philandering husband. They had fought often then. Steve hadn't even spent the night at home. Olivia tried not to meddle in the soul of the child, but in every possible way supported the nighting mood of her daughter when she decided suddenly that she would not run and look for him in the acquaintances, and instead will go to the holiday, where called a friend. Maria had few friends at all, and this Angelica, a girl from the accounting department, a colleague, did not really like Olivia because she was some kind of broken, frivolous at 35, not married, because she was looking for someone special, a prince, waiting. But that time Olivia was grateful to Angelica that she had invited her daughter to some holiday, a party from the company. It seemed to be a good sign. The old woman hoped that maybe at least under Angelique's influence her daughter would finally realize that Steve really wasn't worthy of her. Olivia lay with her eyes open to the darkness of the barracks. Now that the merciful shackles of deep sleep had fallen away, she was getting very cold again. But what drew her attention was a quiet sound coming from outside. It was the creaking of the door. It had been opened. Someone had entered the room. "Who's there?" Olivia asked so quietly that she couldn't hear her own voice. "Who's there?" She repeated the question, and fear pierced her body as much as the cold. "It's me," came a familiar voice. "Steve." The old woman was confused. "What are you?" "Don't make a fuss, old woman," he muttered. "I'm this for a little while. I have here." He didn't have time to finish because the door creaked again, and then Steve shrieked and something heavy fell to the floor. The silence of the night exploded with the sounds of a fight, and apparently Steve was losing, and he was already wheezing. Olivia, herself neither alive nor dead with horror, scrambled around on her strange, cold bed under the heavy blankets, pulled one hand out from under them and reached for the light switch. It was next to the bed. Light flashed under the ceiling. Electricity, unlike heating, came to the barracks properly, and in fact, only thanks to the fact that she could always go to heat boiling water. The old woman was still holding on. The lighting caused a brief confusion among those who fought. And now Grandma Maria could see everything. Steve was lying on the floor, face down, both hands clasped behind his back, and a man was crouching over him like a huge black predator. As he raised his head, he glanced up at the old woman, and recognition flashed in his eyes. And she recognized him. It was the same stranger who had helped her up at the bakery and then treated her and bought her baked goods. The The guy swore short and angry, judging by the intonation, but the words sounded unfamiliar, like a foreign word. Olivia rounded her eyes. It was French. It didn't make anything clearer, though. "Help!" Steve squirmed under his opponent. "Shut up," the black-haired man said, and rose easily in one unified movement. Steve was left lying on the floor, his hands firmly bound with a plastic tie. Somehow Olivia wasn't scared anymore, she just didn't know what was happening. And then, inadvertently, she had another bout of harsh coughing. The old woman was choking, and it seemed to her that her heart was going to fail. She did not immediately realize that the guy in black was near her, that he was leaning over her and saying something. Then she realized that he was asking her what was wrong. He touched her forehead and pulled his hand away, as if he had burned himself on her fever. "How long have you been here?" the strange man asked. Olivia nodded. He frowned. He looked around the room. He looked back at Steve. "You two know each other?" "My brother-in-law." The brunette gritted his teeth so that his cheekbones stood out more sharply and pulled his cell phone out of his jacket pocket. "Cameron, send a car. The old lady's not well." "No, it's not my fault, you idiot. It looks like she has a cold or maybe the flu. I don't know. Right now, she's not feeling well at all." Olivia blinked, continuing to squint at the overly bright light. Her recent savior, meanwhile, had ended the call and was calling again. "There had been a change of plans." "No, I found him. It's just, there's something else I need to do." "No, no problem. I'll call you back." "Man, let go." Steve's voice came out. He was floundering on the floor and he managed to sit up. "Who the hell are you? What the hell are you doing?" "I'm..." "Shut up," the brunette said calmly. "I'm going to release you now, understand?" He lifted Steve to his feet and shook him. "I see," he nodded toward Olivia. "You're a very thoughtful son-in-law, and that's to be expected. But you're lucky. I'll set you free. But don't do anything stupid, okay? You've made a mess of things, and you're gonna have to answer for it. I'm just an enforcer. You'll be talking to someone else. Running is not an option. I'll find it." He stopped talking, closed his eyes for a moment and exhaled sharply, then opened his eyes and continued more calmly. "You're playing doctor, but you're lucky. It's in your best interest not to piss me off, okay?" Steve didn't understand, but he nodded just in case, all his contrived dishiness evaporating. He didn't understand anything, but he felt he was in big trouble. The brunette turned Steve's back to him. The folding knife clicked, and the ties were cut. "It's okay." The guy raised his hands conciliatorily and walked back to Olivia's bed. He didn't let Steve out of his sight either. "Grandma, what's your name?" "Olivia." "Nice to meet you. I'm Alexander. I called for help." "Don't worry, I'll get you some help." "An ambulance?" Olivia whispered, thinking belatedly that she probably should have done it herself earlier. "Even better," Alexander replied. The next events merged for Olivia into something mixed, unclear, and at the same time fragmented into many episodes, as if she was inside a huge, confused kaleidoscope. She realized that some people had put her on a stretcher and carried her out of the barracks, that it was suddenly warm, that she was being taken in a car. Then other people were bustling around. They were doctors. She felt softness, cleanliness of the bed where she was, and it was warm again. They were doing something with her. And then finally came sleep, deep, calm, as never before. When Olivia woke up, the sun was shining outside the window. It was one of those winter days when spring seems to come tomorrow. The old woman looked around at her surroundings. It was a hospital room, and at the same time it was very cozy. "Good morning." A young, pretty nurse entered the room. "How are you feeling, Olivia?" "The doctor will come soon and tell you everything in detail. But I can tell you something too, you'll be fine soon. My name is Alice. You need to eat now. What would you like for breakfast? Here is the menu." A large laminated sheet appeared in the nurse's hands. "Unfortunately, we didn't find your glasses among your things," she said embarrassedly. "If you allow me, I'll read what we have." I, Olivia said at a loss. Grandmother didn't understand a thing. What kind of a wonderful hospital was she in, where the room was only one bed? Everything was so beautiful, pictures on the walls, and the food was a la carte. The nurse managed to clarify the situation. She said that it was a private clinic, White Hyacinth, and that Olivia's stay there was fully paid for. By whom? Olivia asked, shocked, although she thought she already knew the answer. Mr. Barsav. Alexander Barsav took care of everything, Alice answered. What about breakfast, Olivia? Your doctor will scold me if you don't eat anything before his visit. It was strange and embarrassing to be in such a rich position, but Olivia realized that she was really hungry. Christopher came along with the way she was feeling better. The old lady listened to the nurse, read the menu, and said she would like to have porridge with wild berries, a protein omelet with chicken, and a cup of tea. Everything was served about 10 minutes later on a tray and in beautiful dishes. Alice asked Olivia if she was allergic to roses. She answered that she wasn't, and she was just shocked when the tray was filled with a small vase with a real pink candy rose. Olivia's doctor was an old-school man. He looked about 60, but he was sturdy and quick. He introduced himself as Cameron and said that it was necessary, of course, to undergo examinations, but the initial prognosis was the most favorable, and in a couple or 3 weeks of treatment, Olivia would be healthy. Toward evening, Alice looked in on Olivia and asked if she would accept a visitor. She said yes, and Alexander entered the room. How many questions Olivia's grandmother had about what had happened to her son-in-law, how he had ended up in her barracks, and why were they fighting? But she was even more concerned about the reasons for Alexander's extraordinary act of rescuing her again. After all, I'm a complete stranger to you. The old woman waved her hands. I just don't understand. Do you believe in fate? Alexander asked. I do. The day I met you, I considered it a good sign that I'd met someone I could help. And the second time, let's say it's a sign again, but in a different way. He looked at Olivia carefully. She even became a little uncomfortable. It seemed that this young man was looking into her very soul. Do you know what your son-in-law was doing? What kind of business he was in? Olivia nodded. He said he sold vitamins. Some foreign firm had invented a cure for all diseases. Only I thought, Olivia added carefully, that he was lying. He used to say it with a laugh for some reason, and rarely. He started drinking a lot. He told his wife, my Marie, and I was there. Then when he sobered up, he swore a lot, saying it was none of our business, that he's a man, a provider, and he decides everything himself. You were right not to believe him. There was nothing in these supposedly miracle drugs. You know, Alexander continued thoughtfully, they are sometimes called harmless pacifiers, but it's not true. Sometimes people start taking them and refuse the real treatment. The consequences can be the most deplorable. Did someone die? Olivia asked cautiously. A good man. Alexander looked at her carefully, as if reading the old woman's reaction, and then he told her how it was. Grandpa Frank lived in a small village on a picturesque coast. He was a sturdy old man. In his 77 years, he still continued to go to the forest, to hunt, and just, as he said, to rest his soul from the big world, which even reached the village. Grandpa Frank was considered by many to be a hermit, but it was not so at all. He was friends with a family that had long ago moved to the city, and from this family, a boy, Christopher, was often sent to him for the summer. In fact, Christopher's childhood was spent there, in the village, in the company of an old man to whom he became very attached. Time passed, Christopher. This man became a successful businessman, a millionaire, but continued to maintain good, in fact, kinship relations with Frank, who replaced his own grandfathers. They passed away when Christopher was still a baby. Christopher offered Frank to move to the city. After all, his age was already respectable, but he refused and said that his nature and native land kept him and he would not go anywhere. And then the old man fell ill. Christopher arranged everything to take him for examination, and the doctors made a serious diagnosis. Christopher's pancreas was out of order. Naturally, they prescribed treatment. The old man fought back, saying that he didn't need any chemistry. He used herbs like in the old days. It took Christopher a lot of effort to change his mind. Grandpa Frank went back to the village and began to live as before and heal. But then disaster struck. A man came to the village. He began to go door to door and introduce himself to the locals, mostly pensioners, as a representative of a certain pharmaceutical company. He spoke a lot of clever words, shook papers in front of old people's faces, which allegedly told about successful laboratory studies and clinical trials, showed certificates. He assured that the miracle pills would cure all diseases and that it was a natural remedy based on forgotten recipes of medieval healers, enhanced by innovative scientific developments, that it worked directly on human genes, and said many other things. The pills cost a lot of money, $10,000 per pack, and the entire course needed 30 packs. But a discount was provided, and only allegedly, because the buyers, pensioners, they are entitled to benefits. Many, and mostly those who lived alone, agreed. They took out loans, they withdrew their savings, they gave the last of their money. Grandpa Frank gave in too, but he didn't just start taking those pacifiers. He stopped taking the medications prescribed by doctors and decided that thanks to the miracle remedy, he no longer needed to diet. The old man decided that he would not say anything to Christopher, whom he considered as a grandson, his own person. He wanted to please him, to show him off when he recovered. Look, this is how I was cured without your chemistry. But soon his condition deteriorated sharply. He started his disease, and he could not be saved. Christopher found out the details of who had pushed Frank to this decision and took matters into his own hands. He had enough power to organize with the help of his legal team to investigate these miracle drug dealers and bring them to light. Christopher would make sure they never hurt anyone again, but he was much more interested in one particular person. He wanted to find the person who had convinced Grandpa Frank to make that fateful decision. Steve was that man? Alexander's story shook Olivia to the core. She believed him. She now knew what Steve was really like, and grieved that she had not realized his evil, vicious essence before, that she had not understood and done nothing, that she had allowed her daughter to marry this monster and have a child by him. Yes, Alexander answered. Can I ask you something? Olivia felt that she was ready to hear any answer. Who are you? And what do you want to do? I'm Christopher's brother, a cousin. I represent his interests abroad, say. And now he's called me in to help him with this case. So that's where the accent comes from. Olivia shook her head. It seemed to me that you began to forget your native language. I'd gotten used to using it. I spent the last few years in France, and I taught French when I was young. Really? So that's where your charm comes from. I could tell you were a complicated person, he smiled, and Olivia smiled back. But then Alexander became serious again. Christopher wanted to punish whoever had done this to Frank. Punish, not in the way that was legally possible for that man. You know, I was hesitant to talk to you about this at first. And the doctor. Alexander paused for a moment. Your doctor wouldn't approve of it, because it's stressful. But I think you should know. Christopher left the nuances up to me, but basically, Steve should have his arms, legs, and spine broken. Silence hung in the chamber. Olivia looked at Alexander and tried to understand. What kind of man is he? Was he really capable of doing this? She knew he could be kind, generous, but it also seemed to her that in certain circumstances, he was capable of a lot. But now I have my doubts. I mean, he's your son-in-law. That wouldn't be a problem. Theoretically, given what he did to you. You didn't end up in the barracks by yourself, did you? But he is the father of your grandson, and therefore you have a blood bond. And that's what I regret more than anything, Olivia said honestly. And I'll be honest too, I know that Steve did a lot of bad things. But if something happens to him, my grandson, Tony will end up in an orphanage. I'm too old and sick to be trusted with custody of him. Olivia started to sit up on the bed. Alexander walked over to her and handed her the remote control. This button adjusts the position of the top of the bed. If you press it, it will rise smoothly. Olivia gently pressed the button, and indeed part of the bed rose, thus helping her to sit up. Could you hand me my bag, please? It was a small old purse in which Olivia kept the most necessary things: documents, some medicines, glasses, and some photo cards. Here, my grandson. She showed Alexander the photo. He is here in the arms of my daughter, Maria. Alexander looked at the photo very carefully. Your daughter was a real beauty. And what age is the boy? Olivia answered exactly. I understand that. Your brother is that he hates the one who did such a thing. But how can you? It's all so horrible. Olivia felt the tears start to flow from her eyes again. Tony. Who's my grandson with? She remembered something else important. Who did he stay with yesterday when you arrived? You left the baby alone. After all, you think worse of me than I am. Alexander replied jokingly, but there was not a shadow of mirth in his gaze. I entered the apartment after I learned that Vera, that is, your brother-in-law's roommate, had gone to her own apartment and taken the baby with her. She got a call from her sister and she came down to watch the kids while she was at work. And if it makes you feel any better, I wasn't going to do anything to Steve right there. Christopher wanted me to bring him to him so they could talk in person, and then I screwed up. Your son-in-law, for a while, let's say, threw me off balance and ran. I chased him, and you know the rest. Not everything, Olivia replied. What happened after How was I brought here? I accompanied you in my car, Alexander answered. Steve was with me. He was a little more savvy than I thought he would be. I explained to him briefly what was going on and told him that there was a chance of a relatively happy ending for him, but only if he didn't do anything stupid. He walked out of here on his own 2 feet. He's back home. He'll be there and he won't run. He doesn't want his situation any worse than it is now. And you, Olivia, he's the reason you're in the barracks, isn't he? I am. If it makes you feel better, you can tell me how it happened. I don't know. Olivia shook her head. It's just life. It's just that he deceived me. And the old woman told how Steve had taken her apartment and what had happened next. That man definitely deserves to be punished, Alexander said thoughtfully. And at the same time, he must not be touched. What should we do? I will definitely think about it. And as for your property, that of course can and should be corrected. But how? Olivia marveled. I've already signed everything. I'll take care of the problem and I'll let you know. Now I have to go, Alexander said, getting up. Get well, Olivia. Your grandson needs you. Olivia felt exhausted by this conversation. She used the remote control to return the bed to its previous position and decided to take a nap. Olivia, are you asleep? A nurse called her quietly as she entered the room. You have a visitor. I told him that in your condition, it's not good to have many visitors, but he insists. Who? Olivia had no idea who else might be here. Steve, he said, your son-in-law. All right, let him come in, she mumbled, not sure what he wanted from her. Steve knew exactly what he wanted. Even though the events of the previous evening had been a shock to him, he quickly realized that the man who had come for him for his past deeds was somehow special to the old woman. He'd taken her to a paid clinic. Steve had an idea how much it would cost. He had no idea what these two might have in common, but he knew what he had to do. When he got to the room, he immediately started talking about how remorseful he was for mistreating Olivia, about how he realized that they were family. He said that he hadn't done anything wrong. He had nothing to do with it, and he didn't understand why he was being attacked now. And then he suddenly realized that Olivia didn't believe a word he said. Go away, she said simply. It's unfortunate that my daughter married you. It hurts me. What do you want? For me to protect you in front of him? You're a coward, Steve. You always have been. You just used my daughter, our family. Do you have a heart? It's a good thing your son's too young to see what his daddy's like. Your daughter jumped on me. Who else wanted her? Walking around like a gray mouse, just as crazy as her mama. Steve raised his voice, and he wasn't just talking, he was drooling. Son, what son is he to me? She fattened him up, she was one. And he called his dead wife a filthy, filthy word. How can you say that to me? Olivia shrieked. Her hand fumbled on the wall. The nurse had said there was a button to call her somewhere, and the old woman wanted her son-in-law to leave. You really don't like it, do you? Steve grinned. I didn't have anything going on with your daughter at the time. I didn't. Do you understand, old girl? There's no way I can be the father of this kid. The timing doesn't add up. Maria was a whore. I guess she wanted to pick up someone better, but she couldn't. And yes, it was convenient for me to live like that, very convenient. 2 fools got caught, and they hummed their ears. You made me sick. Well, nothing. At least I got an apartment. Steve chuckled evilly. What do you think you're doing? Attracted by the noise on the threshold of the room appeared Alice. Shut up, guards, shouted the girl in the corridor, and in a minute she was joined by a sturdy type. Olivia, your visitor to escort to the exit? Alice asked, squinting unkindly. Yes, I want him to leave. Olivia answered quietly and cried. The guards, almost by the scruff of the neck, escorted her son-in-law to the exit of the clinic. Alice fussed around the patient and apologized for not preventing the scandal earlier. The old woman could only think about what Steve had said. Was he lying? Did he want to hit her hard? Or was it true? Because then, at that time, when Maria said that she was pregnant, they really did not get along with Steve, and a little more would be a divorce. But then who could be the father of the child? And why hadn't Maria, her kind, pure, gentle girl, said anything? Olivia did not know that at the moment of the conversation in the corridor was and heard everything Alexander. He was a little late in the clinic to talk to the attending doctor of the grandmother. And then when he heard everything Steve had said, he left the clinic in a hurry. He had some things to clear up. Veronica basically wanted to have children someday, but she had always thought that the children would be hers, her own. And now she had to take care of Steve's son, as if her sister's brood wasn't enough. Good afternoon. Are you out for a walk? A tall man approached Veronica. She remembered his name. Alexander. He'd come here the other day to see Steve. What their business was, it wasn't clear at all. Steve only said that he knew him. His voice trembled strangely. We're taking a walk. Veronica smiled. We breathe fresh air. It's good for the baby. Naturally, Alexander sat down in front of the boy. Tony had recently learned to walk, but he did it very diligently. The little boy smiled happily and twirled his head. He was amused by the fluffy snowfall. Are you his fiancé? Alexander asked. Fiancé? Well, I'm not. No, we haven't talked about it yet. Veronica giggled coquettishly. Why does he hesitate? Such a kind woman, taking care of the son. Listening to these sweet speeches, Veronica was distracted. Hey, kid, your hat is off on your forehead. Alexander gently reached out to fix the hat. Let me help you. That's it. It's good again. He stood up, smiled at Veronica again. Have a good walk. Say hello to Steve for me. Tell him that things will be clearer for him soon. He knows what I'm talking about. Veronica gave Alexander a thoughtful look and sighed. She really liked this mysterious acquaintance of Steve's. And why didn't she get such a man? Handsome, it is obvious that strong, and also he has a car, obviously expensive. He's not accepting anyone. A secretary in the reception of one of the most famous businessmen of the city and region. Woke up and rushed in front of a tall, black-haired man whose face instantly caused associations with some predatory animal. I'm always allowed, said the stranger, who unceremoniously intended to open the door to the office of the head of the corporation. Bypassing the obligatory stage for all visitors, it was necessary to tell the secretary who he was, and she looked, whether it was appointed by appointment, clarified what the issue was, could ask the chief if he was free. But the girl protested. New girl? He interrupted. The secretary nodded. I like it. Before, only blondes sat here, and you're a redhead? It's refreshing. He winked and entered the office, leaving her confused and embarrassed. Oh, it's you. A man in his 40s in a business suit sitting at the desk glanced at the newcomer. How's our business going? There is news, said Alexander. But before we clear up one question, a party a little over a year ago on a yacht. Models, girls from the firm with which you signed that lucrative contract. It was fun, right? What are you talking about? Christopher frowned and even pushed back the folder with documents he was looking through earlier. Did you have a good time? Alexander continued. So good that you forgot about the consequences, right? And this girl here. Alexander handed his brother a smartphone with a photo. Do you remember her? Christopher frowned, looking at the picture. It had been taken at the party. He was with two girls, the senior accountant, Angelica, from the partner firm. It was a small firm, and such an alliance opened up some great prospects for her. Christopher remembered the other girl's name was Maria. Angelica introduced her as her friend, and then in a confidential whisper told him that Maria was offended by her husband and that she had taken her friend out to get away at last because she was a recluse. The party ended well past midnight. Christopher grimaced. He'd let himself go too far. He behaved like some uncouth boy. He had danced with this Maria and secluded himself with her in the cabin. It had been a flash, some kind of obsession between them. He remembered that when the heat of passion wore off, the girl burst into tears. She began to say that she was so bad She didn't know what had come over her and that she had cheated on her husband. He felt uncomfortable and tried to comfort her. He said it was nothing. They were adults and didn't have to tell her husband about it, especially if he was treating her so badly. Then Angelica picked Maria up and said she would take her home. She didn't seem to realize what had happened between them. Christopher twirled the pen nervously in his fingers. When Alex had arrived, they talked a little about everything, about life, and he'd mentioned this episode. He'd said that he usually had constant mistresses, and then suddenly she'd been bewitched. Why had he said that? No reason. My brother and I never kept secrets from each other. We shared everything. But now Christopher didn't understand what was going on. I'll explain it to you. Alexander understood his brother's confused look. But I have to start from afar. It all started when I started looking for that bastard who killed Frank. I came upon a man who was connected with all this and wanted to pay a personal visit to move on. I went to the suburbs for coffee and met this old lady. An old lady? What does that have to do with anything? Christopher almost jumped. Listen, brother. Listen carefully and don't interrupt, Alexander said, putting his palm on his relative's shoulder. Olivia had been in the hospital for 2 weeks, and that time seemed like a vacation to her. As soon as she felt better, she went out for walks, accompanied by Alice. She could walk in the small courtyard on the territory of the clinic, where fluffy blue spruces grew, or in the miniature but lush winter garden, where there was even a pond with red golden carp. His cough was gone. His heart was working better. Steve never showed up again. But Alexander came almost every day, and Grandma Maria was very happy about it. She was a little uncomfortable to use his kindness, but she did not refuse gifts. He gave her cozy, comfortable clothes to the hospital and then simply said that everything that was needed could be asked from Alice. She would order and he would pay for it later. Olivia asked to take one important thing from the barracks, a photo of her grandfather, Tony. That, too, was fulfilled. Olivia, Alice looked into the room. There are visitors here to see you. Alexander and Alice looked worried. They've just been to the head doctor's office, Anne. They were, and I told you that excessive stress is bad for the patient. But I see you can't stop, said the head doctor who entered the room. Olivia, I need to be present for this conversation. Olivia, what's wrong? The old woman was confused and then aghast because 3 more people appeared in the room. Alexander, who had a boy in his arms. Tony, the old woman stretched out her hands to her grandson, and Alexander gently lowered, put the child on the edge of the bed. He himself pushed the chair and sat closer, ensuring the baby, so that he did not fall off. But how? What? The questions crowded into Olivia's chest, tears welling up in her eyes. How she missed her grandson. Hello, Olivia, Christopher said. He didn't look like a formidable, solid businessman now. He was, of course, wearing an expensive tailored suit, but he looked like a confused, worried man who was about to have a very difficult conversation. It was mostly Alexander who spoke. He spoke without hurry and interrupted several times when the chief physician intervened. He was very interested in whether the patient was feeling well. He came up to her and checked her pulse. Sometimes he grumbled that nerves should be taken care of at such an age after such an illness, and then they try treat, and then that's what happens. Alexander talked about everything. Olivia listened and could not believe it, and at the same time she realized it was true. Her daughter, her Maria, had spent a random night with a man. She was afraid to confide in her mother and even more so to hide it from her husband. Alexander emphasized that this was not just an assumption made because of a conversation he had overheard. It turned out that he had approached Veronica, who was walking with the baby, for a reason. He had managed to discreetly and carefully obtain a few hairs from Tony's head, and thus it was possible to conduct a genetic paternity test, which showed that Tony was Christopher's own son. But what does that make? Olivia whispered. So Steve is a stranger to you. He's a stranger to you. Alexander finished for her. He's not a relative. The baby has a real father. I'm not married, Christopher said, and I never have been. I don't have children. I'm sure of it. I don't have kids except Tony, and I want to be a real father to him. You'd want? Grandma hugged the boy tighter, hugging him. Will you take my grandson away from me? No, I won't give him to you. How can you do that? My little blood. I told you so. The head doctor squinted. Olivia, please calm down. You don't have to be afraid of anything. Christopher continued hurriedly. I have no intention of separating you. But the child, of course, must have all the appropriate conditions. You know what I mean. Olivia, I want to suggest something. You can live next door to me, together with your grandson. I have a big house and there's plenty of room for everyone. The boy needs to be with his real family, and that's me and you. Olivia cried. Although they were not tears of grief, the head doctor insisted that she had had enough visits for the day. Olivia fell asleep easily that night and had peaceful dreams because she knew that there was nothing between her and Steve now. More importantly, she knew that her Maria's son Tony was sleeping somewhere else tonight. It turned out that Alexander and Christopher had taken the boy as soon as the results of the genetic testing were known. Steve gave them the child without a peep. He was most afraid for himself and was ready to do anything if it could whiten him in the eyes of two powerful enemies. In general, the head doctor was against stress for patients very much. But Olivia said that she was ready to receive visitors even today on a new day. Alexander brought a lawyer who explained to the grandmother in clear language that it was possible to cancel her gift. The best specialist would take care of it. True, it was impossible to do anything about the fact that Steve received a share in the apartment after the death of his wife. Olivia rejoiced that she would soon be discharged from Christopher's house, and not just any house, but a mansion in the suburbs. Every day came photos and video messages about how Tony was doing. It turned out he was already surrounded by Nanny's two lovely women in light purple uniforms, playing with the boy, showing him the room he'd been assigned as a nursery, and finally, the day had come. Olivia had to go to the new place. She realized that now a whole new life would begin for her. But there was something else she wanted to understand first. So what's going to happen to Steve? She asked Alexander, who had come to pick her up. You know, he's nothing to me now. Olivia realized that Steve was a terrible person. He had done a lot of bad things. But at the same time, she even felt a little sorry for him. She realized that Alexander's threats were not empty words. She realized that people like Alexander and his brother were capable of many things. I wanted to talk about it, the man said. You know, as soon as I found Steve, I started collecting information about him. Do you know that he's sick? Yes, Olivia nodded. He said he had a lot of headaches. He said it was because of the women's scandals. That's how it is, Alexander laughed. For a long time, the doctors thought it was a blood pressure problem. But the day before yesterday, I got the information that Steve has brain cancer. Olivia gasped. An extremely aggressive form and stage. Anyway, there's no help for it. The doctors say he only has 3 or 4 months left. And when I broke the news to my brother, he doesn't believe in fate the way I do, but he said it's a just retribution. Olivia didn't know what to say. She knew that Alexander was right about something, and yet it was too scary. So you won't touch him? She asked only quietly. Alexander shook his head. No, my brother doesn't want me to get my hands dirty, and frankly, I have my own business to attend to. I didn't know Grandpa Frank, unfortunately. He was a good man, and he will be avenged, albeit by fate. I'm leaving tomorrow, Alexander added. How? Where? Olivia was confused. She did not doubt that Christopher was not a bad or even a good man, because that was what her brother said about him. But still, it was Alexander who had come to her aid that frosty day. It was thanks to her meeting with him that she survived, and it was thanks to him that her grandson found a real father. To Mexico, the young man replied. I've always wanted to go there. My brother and I are a little different. He likes business, but it's too boring for me. If he has difficulties, I'll help him, of course. I've done it many times, but I have my own way. Olivia sighed. How sad it is when people who suddenly appeared in your life, who brought light into it, who brought you back to something you never dreamed of, suddenly leave. One would have thought that Alexander would come to visit his brother and nephew someday, but Olivia realized it might not happen. He might just settle there forever. Who knows? And maybe he would come, but she was already very old. Grandma Maria thought about all this while the car was driving through the city. And that woman, the neighbor who lived with Steve, she asked. Vera? Alexander said. She left him. He was alone. And soon, Your apartment will belong to you. And Tony again. Olivia, don't be sad. He touched her shoulder gently and smiled. We're here. You're home. The car drove through the gate into the mansion grounds. Snow covered everything now, and the branches of the trees and shrubs were like silver in hoarfrost. But Olivia could imagine how beautiful it was here in spring, summer, and fall. She got out of the car, leaning on the hand offered to her. They walked to the house, went up to the wide porch. Two marble lions with curly manes sat on either side of it. He ate well, said the nanny about his ward. It's nice to meet you. My name is Katia. Tony is a very nice young man. He kept asking, where is Baba? I'm here, grandson, said the old woman and stroked the child's head. His hair was as blonde as his mother's. Christopher wants to talk to you some more, said Alexander quietly. He feels guilty for what happened, for treating your daughter like a one-night stand. That's life, Olivia sighed. I don't know how things would have turned out, but she loved Steve so much. She believed he was her destiny. She turned to the baby. Look, Tony, it's your uncle. Uncle, repeated the boy with a very focused look and reached out and touched Alexander's hand. He was interested in his ring. He grinned at him. Grow up soon. I'll give it to you, nephew, when you turn 16. They say it brings good luck. Mom, you realize this is not normal, right? Since the day my father died, our family has been going through some kind of cataclysm every now and then. I don't even know what tomorrow will bring. Sometimes it's scary to wake up in the morning. Leslie, Olivia's daughter. Daughter, it's just a coincidence. I agree that it's unpleasant and even frightening, but I think you're exaggerating a little. No, Mom, you just don't see the connection. I saw it a long time ago, and I think it all started with that phone call from that strange woman. Remember? What woman? You mean Anna? Olivia was surprised. Yes, her. 6 months ago, they had indeed received a phone call from a woman who turned out to be the ex-lover of Peter, the father of the family. Olivia had answered her husband's phone then. He was in the shower. Someone called, and she answered it on automatic. They had no taboo on each other's phones. Where would they be? The couple had been in love for over 30 years. And suddenly, a call from the past. Good evening. Can I speak to Peter? Anna asked when she heard a woman's voice on the phone. Good evening. He's a little busy. I'll tell him to call back when he's free. Olivia answered politely. Her husband often received calls from clients on his private phone, although not usually at this late hour. Would you be sure to tell him? Of course. Can I call you back on this number? Yes, please. When Peter came out of the bathroom, Olivia immediately told him about the call. He was overheating in the bathtub, didn't want to pick up the phone with wet hands, and asked his wife to dial that woman and put it on speaker. She was sitting next to him and heard everything. Hello, Peter. Anna said. Hello, do I know you? He was surprised. We knew each other years ago. My name is Anna. Does that name mean anything to you? Peter was silent for a second. At that moment, he even regretted a little that his wife was sitting next to him and could hear everything. She's talking. Anna, what did you want? It's been years. 32 years, you're right. It's been a long time. Anna, did you want something? He asked again. Yes, I wanted to ask you for help. And how can I help? He asked. But the tension in his voice was palpable. I need money. Can I know the reason for your request? Is your wife around? Maybe she should know about everything. Anna guessed. I have no secrets from Olivia. And she knows about your daughter. At that moment, Olivia looked at her husband questioningly. No, she didn't know that he had another daughter. They had 3 children in their marriage, 2 sons and a daughter, but this was the first time she had heard about this other child. Now she had. He replied and gestured to his wife to be silent. Anyway, my Elizabeth is in the hospital. She needs an expensive operation, otherwise she will die. I don't have that kind of money. Can you help me? How much are we talking about? I need $3 million. She needs that money, not me. We've never asked you for anything all our lives, but now I just don't know what to do. When Peter heard the amount, he tensed up. It was a lot of money. He simply didn't have that much, even if he added up all the money in his accounts. He and his wife had taken out a loan to build a house in the country where they planned to grow old. Now at the stage of construction, it is difficult to sell it in a short time. And where else to take money, he just did not imagine. I don't have that much. I can raise $500,000 in a couple days. It's not enough. Peter, our daughter is dying. I know you never loved me. I know that I chose to keep this baby. I know I've denied you any chance to see her, but understand, our daughter is dying. I need your help. Anna, I understand. I'm sorry, but money doesn't grow on trees. It takes time to get it. I'll try, but I can't promise anything. When do you have to operate? Yesterday. Anna replied. He could hear the tears in her answer. Why didn't you call earlier? He asked. Anna could not admit to him that her pride had prevented her from doing so earlier. She kept hoping that somehow things would get better, but no miracle happened. And now, if this operation isn't done in the next few days, their Elizabeth will die. And with her, Anna will lose the meaning of her life. Peter, will you help me? I'll try. I just need a little time. I'll see what I can do. I'll call you back, but probably tomorrow. Okay. Okay. Anna just said and hung up. Peter couldn't take his eyes off the phone and look at his wife. He realized that a storm was about to break out. He should have told Olivia about Elizabeth, but he didn't. Not because he was ashamed of anything. He didn't want to be seen as a jerk. He'd met Anna years ago at some youth party. He was bored and she was there for him. A one-night stand with no strings attached caused the birth of a child. Anna didn't hide it. As soon as she found out she was pregnant, she tracked him down and confessed. They were both very young. He suggested what he thought was the only right thing to do, to have an abortion, not get married. There was no love, no friendship. They didn't even know each other. It's clear that neither he nor she were happy that evening, but what happened was what happened. When Anna heard about the abortion, she was angry. She didn't want to do it. Then she told Peter in her heart to fuck off. They saw each other a year later by chance. She was walking down the street with Peter, and he was in a hurry to get home. Seeing her, Peter approached, but she wouldn't even let him look in the stroller. Only said, "That's my baby. You have nothing to do with her." "Her? Is it a girl?" "Yes, it's a girl. I named her Elizabeth, and that's the last time we'll talk about her. Disappear and never come into my life again, or better yet, leave town. I'll be leaving soon enough, but Anna, I wish I could help you in some way. It's going to be hard for you on your own, you understand. I don't need anything from you. I'll manage on my own. Goodbye," she said calmly and went on her way. There was no resentment or anger in her voice, only a blind certainty that she didn't need him, and neither did she need his money. Peter resigned himself to it. After all, he couldn't force her, though he thought it was silly to be so stubborn. Couldn't she at least file for alimony? He had a feeling she'd change her mind sooner or later. A couple weeks later, he moved to another city where he was offered a job. He met his Olivia. A year later, they were married, and then life went on as usual. And although he occasionally remembered Anna and her daughter, but did not tell anyone about it, as if there was no such shameful piece in his biography. And now Anna calls, after dozens of years, and asks for help. He really wanted to help her, but first he had to explain himself to his wife. "Olivia, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," Peter said, working up the courage to speak. He looked into her eyes, but he saw no hatred or contempt, as he had feared, only incomprehension. "Peter, you've had a daughter all these years and you had no contact with her. When Elizabeth was little, Anna wouldn't let me, and when she grew up, she didn't want to. What could I do?" "What makes you think she didn't want to?" "She said so herself. I tracked her down on social media once. I texted her, asked her to meet me. She was 20 years old at the time. She said she'd lived her whole life without a father and she didn't need one. I tried to convince her, but she wouldn't listen to me, and then she blocked me. And you didn't say a word the whole time." Olivia definitely looked upset, but Peter wasn't sure what that had to do with anything. "Are you mad?" "Yes, I am." "Can I ask why?" "Because you lied to me." "Olivia, I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you." "What would have changed if you had known?" "I just would have known." "Okay, what do you think you're gonna do?" My wife asked. "I'm gonna try to get the money." "Good." They both got on their phones and started calling people they knew who could lend money. After 3 hours, it became clear that this was not enough. Everyone had their own life and their own expenses. They could borrow no more than $1 million from different people, and from different people, they could get another $500,000 out of their own, albeit with difficulty. But where could they get another 1.5 million? Peter called Anna back in the morning to tell her about everything, but she didn't answer. She called in the evening. Anna, I can bring 1.5 million, he said. Not anymore, Anna replied in a hollow voice. What do you mean you don't need it? What's wrong? Not anymore. You're late. I hate you. Explain yourself. What happened? Elizabeth died this morning. She didn't wait for the operation. You're too late. Peter went cold inside when he heard her, but what she said next frankly scared him. I heard you have 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter. Well, I curse you and your whole family. My Elizabeth is gone, and today I'm gone. And remember, in the last seconds of my life, I will wish death upon you and all your loved ones. I curse you. May your lineage be cut off. May no one with your blood ever see the light of the sun again. Farewell. And she passed out. Olivia sat beside her and saw her husband's face twitch at what he heard. It was as if they both felt the curse that had been said in the grief of their loss weigh on their shoulders, as if they could feel its weight. Their youngest daughter, Leslie, stood in the doorway. She understood nothing, but heard the end of the conversation. With a frightened look at her parents, she asked, "What was that?" Olivia tried to calm her daughter down, told her about Elizabeth and her mother. What was the point, now, of hiding something? Leslie listened and couldn't believe her ears. Not that she felt love, sadness, or sympathy for her dead sister or her mother, for she did not know them at all, but she was frightened. One does not throw such words. Only answered the daughter. They are just words, her mother told her. Don't worry. But Leslie did. She was the kind of girl who believed in curses and spells and the supernatural. She didn't want to think that their whole family was cursed now, and especially since the curse words had been spoken on the very day this Elizabeth had passed away. Her father wouldn't admit it either, but he was uncomfortable with everything he'd heard from Anna. Her voice was full of hatred. She seemed mad. 2 months later, Peter died. He was in good health despite his age, 57, and suddenly he had a heart attack. He had never had a heart complaint before, and then he just had a stroke while he was at work. While Olivia grieved the loss of her husband, Leslie became even more afraid of that curse. She felt like it was all connected, but she had no idea what to do next. Just a month later, an accident happened to her older brother, Paul. He survived, but was seriously injured. He'd been in an accident while hauling another load. Paul worked as a trucker, always carefully drove these huge trucks, and then suddenly flew off the road at 40 kilometers/head. How come? He broke an arm and a leg, hit his head, but at least he was alive. Neither he nor his wife, Julianne, knew anything about Anna and her curse. Olivia asked her daughter not to tell anyone anything so as not to scare them. Another month passed when Alex's second brother's wife miscarried. She was 5 months pregnant when it all happened. The doctors were very surprised because there was no sign of anything like that before. Alex was very upset, but he tried not to be discouraged for his wife's sake. But Leslie thought it was too strange. It was as if a fierce curse was gradually gaining strength. When a few weeks later, she found out she was pregnant, Leslie tensed up even more. 2 years ago, she had gotten married. She and her husband had been planning to have children, so they had been unprotected for many months, even though nothing had worked. And now she's finally pregnant. It would seem that she should be happy, but no, she became terribly afraid. She wanted this child to be born alive and healthy, but there was little confidence in this. Since the death of his father in their lives really happened a lot of strange things. The soil under the house, which was being built outside of town, suddenly began to turn into a swamp. The foundation floated. The contractor didn't understand how that could happen. Alex was in the hospital a couple of times with serious poisoning. Leslie herself not so long ago got into a situation that would not wish the enemy. She was calling the elevator to go to work. The elevator doors opened, and she almost stepped into the void. The doors opened, but the elevator was not there. She wondered how she managed not to fall down the shaft. She was scared out of her wits. That's when she went to her mother to talk to her, but Olivia still didn't believe in the curse. What do you suggest? Olivia asked, hearing her daughter's speculation. I don't know. Let's find her. Let her take it back. And where will you look for her? We don't know her address, just her last name. And a phone number. That's enough. I think we should try. Mom, she cursed Dad's whole family. That includes me and my brothers. And my unborn child. What if it's true? Leslie, I don't believe these things. Mom, Dad was a healthy man and suddenly he's dead, insisted her daughter. These things happen. Yes, it's very sad, but this Anna has nothing to do with it, and it seems to me that very much to do with it. Leslie persisted. Okay, if you don't want to, I'll find her myself. I'll find her and make her take back all her curses. I don't want to spend the rest of my life looking around corners. I don't want to worry about my brothers and their kids. I don't want to worry about my child. I have to do this. Leslie, if you can track her down, we'll go there together, okay? I don't want you to do anything stupid. Okay, promised her daughter, but for some reason it seemed to her that her mom would only get in the way on this trip. Back home, Leslie asked her husband for a favor. Benedict, can you ask Ryan to look for someone? It's very important. She had already told him about the curse and the strange phone call. Benedict listened to her, supported her, though in his heart he did not share her fears. He, like his mother-in-law, thought that all this was nothing, but at the same time he knew that his wife was incredibly stubborn when something gets into her head. Benedict had seen with what enthusiasm Leslie watched Battle of the Psychics. Even though she'd said many times that she didn't believe it was true, she still enjoyed it. Perhaps it was because in her heart she believed that there were other worlds and life after death and curses, even though she had never seen the proof of it in person before. Who do you need to find? He asked. That woman, Anna. But why? I want to go and talk to her. It seems to me that all this is no accident. And what will you say to her? Benedict, I'll decide when the time comes. For now, I just need to find her. Can you help me? His friend Ryan was an investigator. He was supposed to be able to help in this matter, but Benedict couldn't be sure. I'll ask, but no promises. Thank you for that. Leslie said hopefully and kissed her husband on the cheek, wincing at the stubble of 2 days' unshavenness. A couple of days later, Benedict pleased her when he told her that he had managed to get the woman's address. What are you going to do next? I'll go to see her first thing tomorrow morning. Alone? Mom wanted to come with me, but I don't want to take her. Then I'll go with you, okay? My husband offered. Not that he wanted to travel, but Benedict knew that Leslie was not a good driver. She had miraculously managed to get her license, but she was always in small accidents, so he was afraid to let her go alone. Cool, you'll be the navigator, she said cheerfully. No, my dear, the navigator will be you, replied her husband sternly. In the morning, they woke up early and drove to another city, which was 400 kilometers from their home. They had a long way to go, so they stocked up on food and water so they wouldn't starve on the way. Lately, Leslie had developed an unhealthy appetite, but she was sure that it was because she was pregnant. They arrived at Anna's house at 3:30. Going up to the second floor, they immediately saw the apartment with the number 25. Leslie rang the bell, but it didn't seem to work. She knocked on the beautiful oak door once, then again, but no one opened it. She certainly wasn't going to leave. So she knocked even louder until the neighbor from the apartment across the hall opened the door. Why are you making so much noise? A woman in her 60s asked. Oh, hello, sorry if we disturbed you, replied Leslie. We need a woman from this apartment. Her name is Anna. We're her distant relatives. Relatives? You guys are late. Anna's dead. Anna's dead. May she rest in peace. Leslie didn't expect that. It seemed to her that this woman was still praying and cursing her father at night. The news of Anna's death frightened her even more. When did she die? Benedict asked. Yes, on the same day as Elizabeth. They were buried together, the same day. And how did she die? Leslie inquired gently. That's the worst part. She killed herself. She hanged herself in the same apartment. What a horror. I can't imagine living next door to her now. I couldn't cope with losing my daughter. I didn't want to live without her, wailed the neighbor. Leslie felt a chill inside when she imagined how Anna had said all those words on that terrible day, and then took her own life. And her mom didn't believe in curses. Surely none of this was a coincidence. What a pity, just said the girl. If you want to say goodbye to them, I can tell you where they are buried, the woman offered. Yes, please write us how to find them. And also, Do you by any chance have a photo of Elizabeth and Anna? Just in case, Leslie asked. There is one, but it's very old. Anna is still very young, and Elizabeth is only 5 years old. Would that work? I don't know, but I'd be grateful if you could show it to me. The woman took out that photo and also scribbled on a piece of paper where in the cemetery are the graves of their alleged relatives. Why supposedly? In fact, Elizabeth was Leslie's paternal sister. Benedict had taken the photo on his phone. The neighbor wanted to keep it as a souvenir. They took the sheet, thanked her for everything, and said goodbye. When they got into the car, Benedict looked a little worried. Now it seems to me that you and I have watched horror movies in our time, he said. Benedict, tell me please, how do you think, if so many movies are made and books are written about the afterlife, lost souls and other passions, cannot all this be based at least partially on some reality? And if it could be, when you add up all the facts, couldn't this curse be the cause of Dad's death and the other misfortunes that have happened over the last few months? Look, when you put it like that, it may seem logical, but when you think about it, if it could actually be true, it's scary to live. You're telling me this. Try putting one foot down an elevator shaft and the other trying to hold on so you don't fall, and all in heels. Imagining that situation, Benedict frowned. Leslie noticed the twitch in his eye. It wasn't the most pleasant of sensations. No argument there. Yeah, maybe you're right about something. Well, shall we go home then? Then we'll try to figure out what to do next. Yeah, let's go, Leslie agreed. You want to drive? No. I'm not letting you drive until we get rid of all this. He started the car and pressed the gas pedal. The navigator took them on a slightly different route this time. It found a shorter road. It was starting to get dark outside when they passed a small town. The people in the town seemed lively. It was as if they were in a hurry to get somewhere. Soon Benedict and Leslie realized what was wrong. After a few hundred meters, the road was blocked. In the middle of it were special vehicles and signs indicating a detour. They'd have to take a long detour to get around it. What do you think is going on there? Leslie asked curiously. I have no idea. We will not get home until morning, Benedict said irritably. And let's go and see, she suggested. We'll see if it won't be long. She was drawn to the crowd, but she could not understand why. You won't calm down, will you? Benedict asked tiredly. Please, just for 5 minutes. Shall we go? His wife urged him. Okay, just 5 minutes. Leslie got out of the car and walked toward the crowd of people. Everyone was staring and yelling, but it was hard to make out the words. What's going on out there? She asked an elderly woman standing a little farther away. They're making a movie, she said calmly. A movie? You? How interesting. Leslie rejoiced like a little girl. Nothing interesting. It's garbage. And about what? The girl persisted. About witches, answered the stranger without looking at her. Why nonsense? I think it's very interesting. They don't know anything about them. They have no idea of who they are. Aubrey replied tiredly and finally looked her straight in the eye. Her expression turned from tired to concerned in a second. My name is Aubrey. Come with me, beautiful maiden. Come into the light. There was a lantern nearby, and the woman dragged Leslie by the arm and led her to a place where she could get a better look at her. You're in trouble, said Aubrey. You know it. She guessed from her frightened look. I know, but where do you come from? I know a lot of things. I've been around a long time. What am I to do about this trouble? I won't tell you right away. You have to think about it, consider everything. Is it your husband? She asked in the affirmative. Yes, my Benedict. Let you and Benedict drop the old onto the house. I will give you tea, and at the same time we will think what can be done with your trouble. It seemed to Leslie as if fate itself had thrown them into this town to meet this Aubrey. She had a ghostly hope that this woman could really help her. She seemed to forget her hunger and fatigue for a second, as if the very thought had energized her. Of course, let's go. Agreed. Do you live far away? No, about 15 minutes away. I'll show you, said Aubrey, walking to the car. Hello, Benedict, she said to her husband, and then just stop crying. Go to his grave, say goodbye, and don't cry anymore. Thank him for everything he did for you. Pray for him and say goodbye. Let the wretched man go, Let him go in peace. Go tomorrow and go. All right, Leslie said meekly. All right, you go already. You got a long drive ahead of you. You'll be home by nightfall. Aubrey said nonchalantly as she led her guests away. If your mother asks to go with you, don't take her. Leslie did not understand anything, but nodded. The couple drove in silence for half an hour. Each was thinking of his own, but about the same thing, when Benedict suddenly asked, "What did you dream?" Leslie looked sadly at her husband and opened her mouth to tell, but suddenly remembered the warnings of their new acquaintance. "Sorry, I will not tell." "Bad dream," she replied. "Leslie, what was all that just now?" "I don't know, but Benedict, I think she can help us. I believe her." "But it doesn't work that way," he insisted. "It doesn't happen," I agreed, "but how did she know?" "She didn't say anything at all." "Yeah, nothing at all. About her father, about her brother, about that Anna. I think she knows more than we do. You'll take me here in 3 days, won't you?" Of course I will. I won't let you go alone." They did get home when it was late at night. It took longer than they planned. When they got to bed, they fell into a dreamless sleep. When they woke up in the morning, Leslie called her mother and told her everything. "Why didn't you take me with you?" "I didn't want to worry you. You don't believe any of this anyway." "I think I believe it a little more than I used to." "So you're going again in 3 days?" "Yes, we are." "Will you take me?" Olivia asked. "Sorry, Mom, we can't." "Why not?" Olivia was surprised. Aubrey asked. "It's strange, very strange." After breakfast, Benedict reminded his wife to go to the cemetery. They bought a bouquet of flowers, white roses, which her father had often given to his wife, and he liked them particularly. As they approached her father's grave, it seemed to Leslie that he was walking beside her. Sometimes it felt like if she held out her palm, as in her childhood, her father would take her hand. She even smiled at the thought. After placing the roses on the grave, Leslie looked at her father's picture with longing and love, and then said, "Daddy, it's time for you to leave us. I love you, and I always will, but it's time for you to go. There is another world waiting for you, and we will stay here for now, but know that we will meet again. I won't cry anymore, I promise you. Go in peace. You're the best dad in the world, and you always will be. Goodbye." As soon as she finished speaking, a light breeze came out of nowhere. The leaves of the birch tree that stood near the neighboring grave rustled, and a big May beetle landed on my father's monument. Leslie watched the beetle fly away and mentally said goodbye to her father, wishing him luck. It seemed to her that with this beetle her father's soul was flying away into the sky. Silly, of course, but she felt a little better. 3 days passed. Leslie and Benedict could hardly wait until it was time to set out again. They already knew where Aubrey lived, so they had no trouble finding her house in that town. When they arrived, she was standing at the gate with a basket in her hands. Leslie got out of the car and said hello. "Have you been waiting long?" "No, I just got out," the woman said calmly, as if she knew exactly when they would arrive, but neither Leslie nor Benedict were surprised. A few hours later, they drove up to the cemetery where Elizabeth and Anna were buried. "You stay in the car. You're heavy," Aubrey said to Leslie. "You stay with her." Turned to Benedict. "But how will you find the right place?" He wondered. "Why look for it? She herself is standing there waiting," the woman said calmly and walked with a confident gait to where she thought she should go. "What do you think she will do?" Leslie asked her husband when Aubrey was out of sight. "I have no idea, but I don't really want to follow her. It's kind of creepy out here." "It's always creepy in a cemetery," agreed. They had been in the car for over an hour when Aubrey finally returned, but she looked worried. "Is everything all right?" the couple asked in unison. "I'm not sure. She's restless. I hope everything worked out, but we have to make sure." "And how?" Without understanding anything, asked Leslie. "I know how. Come to my place. I'll explain everything." Without asking any more questions, they got into the car and drove back to Aubrey's house. It was actually hard to keep quiet and not ask anything, but why they were both afraid they wouldn't like the answers. Suddenly, Aubrey started talking on her own. I mean, she didn't even love him, just one night, but she loved her daughter. She loved her daughter very much. She had a resentment for her daughter. It's bigger than her own resentment. I hope she'll let it go. And if she doesn't, Benedict asked, looking at his wife's frightened face. And if she doesn't, we'll keep going to her until she forgives. When they arrived at Aubrey's house, she asked Benedict to sit in the car and took Leslie with her. Don't worry, all she said was, I won't hurt her. When she entered the house, she rummaged on one of the shelves, found a vial, poured a few drops into a mug of water, and handed it to Leslie. Drink. The girl looked at her warily, but drank every drop, feeling heavy in her head and body. Aubrey took her hand and led her to an old sofa, laid her head on her lap, and stroked her hair, saying, Now you will fall asleep. You will dream of that Anna. Don't be afraid. Ask her for forgiveness. She'll be angry, but you'll smile at her. Tell her you're sorry you didn't recognize Elizabeth that. Leslie heard nothing more. She fell into a deep sleep. Just as Aubrey had said, Anna appeared in the dream, but she seemed much older than in the photo. She was holding a teddy bear, apparently her daughter's toy. Her eyes were so angry, so hurt. She was whispering to herself, but the girl couldn't make out her words. She tried to say something to her, but it was as if Anna didn't hear her, as suddenly everything disappeared. Leslie woke up, trying to understand what had happened. What did you see? Aubrey asked calmly, continuing to stroke her hair. Apparently, she had been stroking her while she slept. I saw Anna. Did you apologize? I tried, but it was like she didn't hear me. She just whispered something. What did she whisper? I couldn't make it out. Were there animals or birds in the dream? Live ones? No, not alive. Aubrey was surprised. There was a toy, a teddy bear. She was hugging him all the time. You remember what he looks like? Can you track him down? Not to buy a new one, but to find the old one. He knows all the secrets. Where would I find him? He's at home with them. He didn't tell me everything. There's another secret. We have to find out. Leslie went back to her husband, got in the car, and told him everything. He was just as surprised, but only asked, Are we going to break down the door? Leslie and Benedict drove back to that town. It was already dark out. No, we took all the things out of it just yesterday. There were buyers. Where'd the stuff go? Clothes were given to the poor, but the toys, I'll go and ask. You wait. Diana returned a few minutes later, but she looked puzzled. There was only one toy, but there were a lot of books and things were taken to the orphanage. It's on the outskirts of town. Only that bear was probably already given to the children. What will you take from the orphans? Benedict and Leslie just looked at each other. They both realized that there were more important things at stake than a child's resentment. When they left the church, Benedict thought of something. Why don't we buy some other toys and swap? He suggested. Exactly. I wouldn't have thought of that. You are a head with two ears. She smiled. On the way, they stopped at a children's store, picked up a lot of toys for all tastes and ages, filled the trunk, and then went to the orphanage. Trying to imagine the scene in their heads, how they would offer the workers of that institution to exchange an old teddy bear for a mountain of other toys. They both became a little ashamed, but they could not think of anything better. When they found out that people came with gifts for orphans, they were easily allowed inside. Maddie, one of the teachers, met them. Hearing the unusual request of the couple, she raised her eyebrows in surprise. Mishka, from the church? They bring us toys every day. I don't even know what he looks like. I know. Leslie replied, Just show me the toys. I'll find him. Well, okay. But you are very strange people. Maddie said cautiously and led them into the playroom. When they saw the new toys, the children ran to them. They started looking at them, opening the boxes, fussing and cheering. And only one boy about 10 years old sat in the corner and did not want to join in the fun. He looked sad or hurt. Leslie looked at him so much that she didn't even notice that he was clutching the teddy bear in his hands. What do we do now? It's him, she whispered in her husband's ear, pointing at the boy. Are you sure? Yes, absolutely. Benedict took one of the cars and went to the boy. Hi, what's your name? He asked. Peter, only answered the boy, looking at him with sad eyes. And I am Benedict. Hello, Benedict. Don't you want to see the new toys? Will you come with me? No, I don't want to. I already have, said the boy and pressed the teddy bear even tighter in his chest. But there are lots of others. I said I don't want to. Little Peter replied resentfully. Leslie watched them from the side, trying to understand what was wrong with this boy. And suddenly she realized he looked a lot like her brother Alice at that age. Just the same face. What a coincidence. She walked over to Maddie and quietly asked, "Who's that boy?" "Name's Peter. Last name Stone." "Stone?" Leslie was surprised. "Yes," the woman grinned. "We like to make up unusual names for children, connected somehow with their past." "What does his last name have to do with his past?" "I'm not sure. I've only worked here for 2 years, but the last teacher who quit a year ago said that I think his mother's name was Elizabeth. That's why the last name was Stone. Is there any way to find out Elizabeth's last name?" "I don't think so. All the documents are classified. They can't be accessed." "Not even you?" Leslie asked with a hint. "We can be very grateful, if you know what I mean." Maddie looked at her suspiciously. "Why do you want all this?" "I'm not sure, but I think this boy might be my nephew." The teacher slammed her eyes shut in surprise. "I thought you were here for a toy." "I thought so too, but now I'm not so sure. So you'll help me?" "Only on one condition," squinted her eyes and answered the woman. "On what condition?" "If it turns out to be your nephew, then you take him with you. I'll help you with the paperwork. It's easier for relatives to take children than strangers." Leslie never thought their trip would end up like this. She even forgot to consult with her husband and just answered right away, "I'm in." Maddie asked her colleague to look after the children, and she went somewhere else. Taking advantage of her absence, Leslie called her husband and told him everything. He was very surprised when he found out. "Do you want to take him away?" "Benedict, I know it's a bit much, but what if it's true?" "Leslie, it's not a toy. It's a live baby. You realize that, don't you?" "What's his name?" Benedict sighed, realizing that he was about to make things worse, but answered, "His name is Peter." "And why is his name exactly like that?" Leslie bit her lip nervously. Could Elizabeth really give the child to the orphanage and named him like his father? But if that was really the case, then how could she leave this boy here? He was her own blood, and then it hit her. That's why they were here. When Anna had cursed Peter and his family, she hadn't known she had a grandson, had she? Or had she, but that was why she had cursed him? Or did she know, but that's why she cursed? There were so many unanswered questions. Leslie, on impulse, walked over to little Peter and squatted down beside him. Up close, he looked even more like her little brother. "Hi, are you Peter?" "Hi. Do you want my teddy bear too?" "I'm not giving it back." "No, I don't want your teddy bear, I want." She didn't get to finish the "you" part when Maddie called out to her. Leslie got up and went straight to her. "Did you recognize the last name?" the girl asked hopefully. "Let's go into the other room," the teacher suggested, and the couple obediently followed her. When they were alone with them, the woman asked, "How do I know that you will not deceive me?" "What do you mean?" surprised Leslie. "Well, for example, I will name the last name, and you just say that it is not her and go away, and you will get the information." Benedict was not confused. "Give me a piece of paper. I'll write Elizabeth's surname on it. You say it, and I'll immediately turn over the sheet. If the last names are the same, we'll take Peter with us." "Take him with us?" his wife asked in hope and surprise. "We will." He answered only, took the paper from Maddie's hands and wrote Elizabeth's name, then folded it in half. "Now it's your turn." Maddie looked at both of them suspiciously. They were looking more and more like Bavgeman to her, but she had nothing to lose. "Walker," she said loudly, and snatched the paper from his hands, read what was written on it, and smiled. "That's wonderful. So now our Kalinka will have parents." Benedict and Leslie looked at each other. They saw mixed emotions in each other's eyes. Neither of them would have thought that they would not return home alone. Of course, they wanted to break Anna's curse, but they had no idea it would end up like this. On the other hand, how could one abandon a child who was a blood relative? Yeah, some people would just walk on by and not look back, but not these two. Leslie looked at her husband with gratitude and hope. Benedict looked at her with tenderness and a little fear. He didn't think he would become a father before his wife gave birth, but he was morally prepared for it. Well, or at least he hoped that they would manage. "So now Kalinka will have parents." Leslie repeated after her, and then, without asking permission, returned to the room where the children were playing. She approached the boy again and said that phrase in full. "Peter, I don't want your teddy bear. I want you. Do you want to play with me? I'm not a toy," the boy remarked. "I want to be your mommy. Do you want to be?" Suddenly, the boy's sad eyes shone with such hope and joy that Leslie could not hold back her emotions and tears ran down her cheeks. "Will you be my mom?" he asked. "Yes, may I?" "Sure," he said and stood up and hugged her, and the same teddy bear stuck between them. Of course, they both realized that all this adoption stuff is not done so quickly, but it turned out that if the caretakers of the orphanage are interested in giving the child to a family, the paperwork can be done much faster than usual. Just in case, the couple called the workplace and warned that they were taking a little vacation at their own expense. Leslie was let go without problems, but Benedict had to listen to the unhappy muttering of his boss. But he was not surprised, because one day off turned into a week of leave at his own expense. Usually adoption takes many days, but let's not forget that this is a fictional story, okay? Anyway, the next day the boy left for his new life with his new parents. Making himself comfortable in the newly bought baby seat, Peter looked at his father's car in surprise. He had never seen one like it before. Had he ever seen one before? He couldn't remember. He had taken Bear with him. Bear, by the way, looked as good as new. It had been gift-wrapped in Anna's apartment all this time. No one had ever played with it. "Are we going home?" the boy asked hopefully. "We have to stop at one more place first," replied Leslie with a smile. "But then yes, we will go home." Benedict started the car, typed Aubrey's address into the navigator, and stepped on the gas. A few hours later, they were already pulling up to her house. Aubrey came out to greet them a second later, as if she could smell them. When she saw the kid get out of the car, she smiled. "Found it? You knew?" Leslie was surprised. "Sure did," Aubrey said with a satisfied look on her face. "Did you get the teddy bear?" Peter took it out of the car and looked at the strange woman in surprise. "Why do you all want my teddy bear so badly?" he asked. "We're giving it to your grandmother," replied Aubrey. "I have a grandmother?" "Not anymore, but she really needs that teddy bear. Come on, get back in the car. You'll understand soon enough." And they drove back to the cemetery. Aubrey again forbade Leslie to go with her to the grave, but this time she took her husband and her newfound son with her. Benedict was surprised, but followed her nonetheless. When they reached the spot where the mother and daughter were buried, Aubrey stopped and asked Kalinka for a teddy bear. "Your grandmother didn't know about you when she said something. Would you please put the teddy bear on her grave? On the one with the wreath of red flowers, and ask for forgiveness, okay?" "For what?" "No reason. Say, 'Grandma, I'm sorry.' And then put the bear on the wreath. Can you do that?" Peter shrugged his shoulders. He didn't understand why it was necessary, but he did exactly as the strange woman asked him. He wasn't scared, but rather curious about what it was all for, but he didn't ask questions. He wanted to go to his new home as soon as possible. "Now you go?" Aubrey asked. "I'll catch up with you soon." Benedict picked up his son and put him on his shoulders. Peter laughed and clung to his neck to keep him from falling. "Careful, you'll strangle him," Benedict asked cheerfully, and the boy loosened his grip. They walked back to the car. Leslie looked at them both and still couldn't believe this was really happening, but she was glad. After 10 minutes or a little more, Aubrey came back. This time she was smiling. "It's all good now. You can go home," she said with relief. "Really?" Leslie was happy. "Really? And how can we thank you?" Benedict asked. "Would you fix my roof?" suggested Aubrey. "That's easy," he agreed. "I'll send the workmen and materials to you tomorrow. I just need to choose what you want to put on it." "Yeah, I thought it was just a patch job." "No, if I'm going to do it, I want it done right, just like you," he insisted. "Well, then I'd like shingles. These roofs look so beautiful, but it must be red so that you can see it from afar." "Then it will be red," agreed Benedict. "What is the delay? We passed a store with building materials. Let's stop by. You can choose your own shade of red. There's plenty of them." Aubrey agreed. They got in the car and drove to the store. Looking at the samples, she pointed to one of them without hesitation. The color of ripe strawberries, so beautiful and bright. "I want that one," she said. Benedict went to the salesman and arranged everything. He said that tomorrow the guys would come to him after they had measured the roof and realized how much material was needed. He asked them to make sure they didn't get the shade wrong. Then they all drove to her house together. Aubrey suggested they have tea and pancakes for the road and feed their son, because it was a long way to go. When they had eaten and drunk, Leslie went up to the lady of the house and asked, "Aubrey, can I ask you a question?" Aubrey gestured for her to step aside so Peter wouldn't hear. They went outside together and sat on a bench behind the fence. It was a complicated story, but I didn't understand it all. Immediately began to answer the woman, realizing what the girl wanted to know. "Can you tell me what you understood?" Aubrey told what she had learned about the story of the boy, his grandmother, and his mother. A confusing story, but at least it explained something. It happened on the very last day of the mother and daughter's life. Excited Anna came to the hospital to Elizaveta in the morning. There was such hope shining in her eyes. "My daughter, everything will be all right. Soon we will have money. You'll get a transplant. I found the money," her mom told her happily. "You found the money? But where?" Elizabeth was surprised. She had given up hope that she would survive. She had resigned herself to the fact that she was living out her last days in this world. "I called your father. He said he would find the money." "Who?" My daughter frowned. "Peter, your father. Mom, where did you get his number?" "We still know each other. I made inquiries and tracked him down." "But why?" "I won't accept his help. He's a traitor. He abandoned us." Elizabeth was angry. Her mother had told her all her life that her father had left them and did not want to take part in her daughter's life. She told her a lot of lies to avoid sharing her love, but instead she'd grown to hate all the men in the world. No, Elizabeth didn't lash out at them like a fierce beast, but in her heart, she considered them all traitors and liars. It was difficult for her to build a long-term relationship with someone. She was always waiting to be stabbed in the back. "Daughter, I realize your father has been away all these years, but now he wants to help you." "No, Mom, that's out of the question. If he didn't need me before, I don't need his handouts now. I'd already signed the DNR. The matter is closed. I don't want to spend the rest of my life thinking he gave me money." "But you'll live." Her mother tried to convince her. "Isn't that enough?" "It's not enough, Mom. You said yourself that he wouldn't even look at me. He threw us out of his life like garbage." "Elizabeth, my daughter, I'm sorry, but I haven't been completely honest with you. He didn't abandon us. At least he didn't want to leave you." "What?" Elizabeth's eyes widened in surprise. "I was the one who took you and left. I told him to stay out of our lives. I didn't want to share you with him. We didn't love each other. I wanted you all to myself. Forgive me, please, but daughter, you must accept your father's help. You have to live. He wanted to help you, to be a part of your life. I didn't let him." Anna confessed for the first time in her life. "What?" Elizabeth asked with horror, looking at her mother. "What have you done?" "Elizabeth, this is such a chance." "Mother, that's not what I mean. Why did you lie to me? Do you even know what I did myself, being sure that my father didn't need me?" "Mom, how could you?" Anna didn't know what her daughter was talking about. They had secrets from each other, as it turned out. "Elizabeth, what could you have done? You're the most." "Mom, I gave the baby to an orphanage. I didn't want her to raise a boy. I was so convinced that all men are liars that I abandoned him." "What?" Anna flapped her eyes in surprise, trying to figure out if it was true or not. "And where is he now? Do I have a grandson?" "No, Mommy, you don't have a grandson," replied her daughter angrily. "He may not even be alive anymore, because I abandoned him. I just gave birth to him and left him in the hospital." "But why did you abandon him? Why did you give birth at all?" The mother didn't understand. Anna knew nothing about the birth of the child. The mother began to guess that it happened when she went to work in another city for a year and left her daughter alone. When she returned, the very same teddy bear appeared in their house. It was just lying on the windowsill in a bag. Elizabeth said that it was given to her as a gift, but it turns out that she actually bought it for her daughter as she hoped. But when she found out that a son was born, she gave it up. "But how can that be? I had hoped to the last moment that it would be a girl." Elizabeth almost screamed. "Mom, I abandoned my son because of your lies. You lied to me for so many years and convinced me that my father didn't need me. How could you?" There was such hatred in her gaze that Anna was frightened. Elizabeth should not be nervous at all. She was so upset by her mother's revelation that she became emotional, began to choke, and then suddenly fell on the bed dead. "Daughter, daughter, daughter." Her mother was rubbing her. The doctor called the doctor. Nurses came running into the room, but the refusal to resuscitate prevented them from doing anything. Elizabeth didn't want to be brought back again. It had happened so many times before. She was tired, lost all hope, realizing that they couldn't afford the surgery, that they might not be able to find a donor. She was desperate when she signed that paper, even though she thought she was doing the right thing. Anna left the hospital so distraught. The thoughts in her head were jumbled. The mind seemed to be foggy. She was grieving and angry at the same time. In the evening, unable to deal with her emotions, she called Peter in anger and cursed him, not thinking that she was condemning not only his children and grandchildren, but her own as well. She had committed the worst sin of all. She just wanted to end her torment, so she said goodbye to her life. Did she know that her curse would have such power? It is unlikely that anyone can answer that question, but it happened the way it happened. In general terms, Aubrey tried to explain everything to Leslie. She didn't seem to understand everything, but at least she understood something. And how do you understand a mother who lied to her daughter her whole life? How to understand Elizabeth, who refused to give up the child only because of his sex? How do you make sense of it all? One thing Leslie knew for sure was that it was good that they took the boy with them. Of course, he was unlikely to forget the first 10 years of his life, but now at least he would live in a loving family. After saying goodbye to Aubrey, the parents and their son went to their home. They lived in a 2-room apartment for which they still paid the mortgage, but there was not much left. Benedict had bought it before his marriage when he had planned to start a family. The bedroom had been given to Peter and the living room had been turned into his parents' room. How happy he was when they went to the store together and picked out the new furniture he wanted. A few days later, when all the rearrangements in their house were completed, Leslie invited her mother to visit. Of course, she guessed that Olivia would not be very happy and most likely would not understand why they did it that way, but she didn't care. Leslie herself didn't care that Peter was her sister's son by another woman. He was her blood nephew and now her son. "Mammy, come and visit right away," she said, calling her mother first thing in the morning. "Maybe you'd better come to my place," Olivia suggested. "No, we need you to come to us. We have a surprise for you," her daughter urged. "A nice one, I hope. I'll tell you one thing for sure, it's a surprise." Olivia arrived a couple hours later. She didn't have any plans for the day, but her daughter had managed to intrigue her. When Leslie saw her cab pull up, she ran outside, wanting to prepare her mother for what she was about to see. They sat on a bench near the entrance for half an hour while her daughter told her about their adventures. Mom listened and could not believe it. And when a little boy appeared in the story, she was especially surprised. "Leslie, you what? You took him?" "Yes, we adopted him. And before you get all indignant, I wasn't going to. I want to meet him. Mom asked me to." "Then let's go," Leslie suggested more cheerfully. They entered their apartment together. Benedict and Peter were in the nursery building some kind of constructor. Olivia entered the room almost silently and looked at the boy curiously, then came closer and sat down on the floor beside him. "Hi," she said softly and touched him with her finger as if she were trying to see if he was real or not. "It tickles." Peter smiled and looked at her. "Hi, who are you?" "I'm your grandmother. My name is Olivia. I do have a grandmother," the boy said excitedly, stood up and hugged her around the neck. "Hi, Grandma." Olivia smiled, hugged him too, and then walked over to her daughter. "He has Grandpa's eyes. Did you notice?" "No, he looks like Alex." Leslie smiled. "Who do you think Alex looks like?" That's true. Alex has always looked like his dad. Anyway, now we have Peter back in the family. You don't mind, do you?" "How could I mind? He's your son now." Grandma replied fondly now. "He's so small, so thin, and you can't tell that he's already 10. It's all right, we'll fatten him up. He'll grow up." Leslie smiled and kissed her son on the top of his head. From that day on, all the misfortunes in the Kita family stopped. A few months later, Leslie gave birth to a healthy baby girl, giving Kalinka a real sister. Her brother Alice's wife got pregnant again, and Paul fully recovered from the accident. Life was back on track, and everyone lived happily ever after.